The palisade rose ahead, thick trunks with pointed tops, proof that whoever built Camp Persistence had done so with urgency and purpose. Sage followed behind Richard with careful steps, eyes flicking from the structure to the man leading them in. Something about Richard itched at him. The man's calm was too polished, as if he hadn't gone through the same hellish tutorial that they had. It didn't sit right with Sage. They passed through the gates, the heavy wooden doors groaning open with a push from a nearby guard. Inside, Camp Persistence spread out like a small village carved from the swamp. Log cabins and lean-tos dotted the clearing, their construction rough but purposeful. Wooden walkways covered the worst of the muck. Fire pits smoked in the distance. Sage frowned. The clearing looked natural, but had it always been here? He couldn't spot any stumps outside the camp, but with the system, enhanced stats, and enough people working together, it wouldn't be hard to rip roots out, flatten the land, and cover the damage with dirt and swamp clay. Still, something about the quiet here made his skin crawl. They had fought to survive every day since the tutorial started. Fought tooth and nail for every step of progress. And here was a man in spotless clothes with steady eyes who smiled like he ran a summer camp. Richard turned, walking backward as he called out, "Healer team, incoming." 3 people peeled away from a larger group and moved quickly toward them. Kyle, supported by Brian and Miriam, was pale, unconscious from the pain of his missing leg. "Take him to the medical hut," Richard said, nodding to the trio. "You'll be in good hands." Brian and Miriam didn't move. Miriam's grip tightened around Kyle's waist. "We'll go with him," Brian said. Richard paused, then nodded, his smile never wavering. "Smart. I'd do the same. Trust isn't given lightly in this place." He motioned to the 3 medics. "Lead the way. We've got room for all of you." The group peeled off. Amanda gave Sage a small look, then followed after them. Richard turned back to the rest of the group. "When the tutorial started a week and a half ago, I was just like everyone else. Dropped in with 4 strangers and no clue what was happening. I chose a profession that fit my old life, civic arbiter. Thought maybe I'd be helping manage a city or something." He gave a quiet laugh, as if amused at his own naivety. "Turns out the tutorial didn't care that my profession was a terrible choice for the given circumstances. My original group didn't have a single fighting class. So we hunkered down. No monster slaying for us. Just 5 scared people in a half-assed hut." They rounded a bend and Richard pointed to a sagging lean-to near the edge of the clearing. "That was it. Our first shelter. We keep it around as a reminder." Sage stared at it. Rough wood, uneven branches, a moss-covered roof that probably leaked when it rained. It wasn't impressive, but the fact that it had been built at all during the first days of the tutorial was. More people found us. Some joined us right away. Others took time. But every one of them saw something worth staying for. And everyone added something new. "We just finished the wall yesterday." They passed newer buildings, some still under construction, others already bustling with activity. People moved between them, carrying bundles of wood, talking, eating. It all looked peaceful. But Sage couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stepped into a stage play. The lines were right. The props, convincing. But something in the performance rang hollow. He kept walking anyway. He needed to know more. Richard continued leading them deeper into Camp Persistence. The ground beneath their feet had been reinforced with laid wooden planks in high-traffic areas, and the buildings here were sturdier than those near the palisade. Ahead, he gestured toward a long, low building made from thick tree trunks and lashed together with vines. "That's the longhouse," Richard said. "Most of us sleep there in shifts. We always keep a rotation of people awake just in case." Sage glanced at the longhouse's structure. Its windows were little more than narrow slits covered with animal hide. Still, it was weatherproof. Richard kept talking as they walked. "When we finished the outer wall, I got a system notification. It classified Camp Persistence as a low-grade settlement. Apparently, that comes with benefits. The system won't send standard monsters to attack us anymore. Not until day 31 when the walls to the other quadrants lower." Sage slowed his pace a little. "What about the Lords of the Swamp?" Richard looked over his shoulder, his expression still maddeningly calm. "They're exempt, unfortunately. But we've tracked 4 of them so far. Scouts are keeping eyes on all of them. At a distance, of course." Sage narrowed his eyes. "Did you have anyone tracking Carvaxis?" Richard nodded without hesitation. We did. So why didn't your scout intervene? Warn us it was that strong. Richard stopped walking and faced Sage directly, his voice patient but firm. Because we don't stop people from walking their path. Some groups choose to hunt the lords. Some don't. We're not here to tell anyone how to survive the tutorial, only to offer safety when they're ready for it. He smiled again. That's why we helped Nadine. When she ran into our camp shouting for help, we confirmed her story with our scouts. They can send messages across distance, but it takes a minute or two. Once we verified that Carvaxis had been attacked and that the attackers failed, we knew her group needed help. They started walking again. Sage said nothing, but kept watching Richard out of the corner of his eye. As they moved through the camp, Sage took in the people around them. They weren't smiling, exactly, but they looked steady. No one carried weapons openly. No one scanned the treetops or moved with that twitchy caution of someone used to being hunted. He saw a group gathered around a large communal fire, eating what looked like soup from carved wooden bowls. Others sat in clusters, chatting softly. Sage felt his guard ease just a little. Maybe this place really was what it seemed. Maybe the week and a half of fighting for his life had forced him to keep his guard up at all times. Richard pointed out a small set of outhouses, a wide-open clearing with training dummies and sparring circles, and a few other huts whose purposes weren't immediately clear. Finally, he led them to the largest building in the camp. Its door was reinforced with bark-covered slabs, and the front steps had been smoothed flat. "This is our meeting hall," Richard said, pushing the door open. "Come in. Let's talk properly." Inside, the space was surprisingly roomy. A massive wooden table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by rough but sturdy chairs. Sage noticed the table was freshly built, no polish or decoration, just raw craftsmanship and function. Richard took a seat and gestured for the others to do the same. "Here's the deal," he said once everyone was settled. "You're welcome to stay, but we won't force you, and you can leave any time you like. But if you stay, you work. We don't have room for freeloaders. Everyone contributes something." He folded his hands atop the table. "This is a survival situation, but it doesn't have to be chaos. If we're going to live through this together, everyone has to carry their weight." Sage leaned back in his chair, studying the man across from him. He'd heard nothing obviously untrue. Nothing explicitly dangerous. And yet, the unease hadn't gone away. He stayed quiet. The group sat in silence for a few seconds after Richard finished speaking. They glanced at each other in a way that said more than words could. A silent exchange. Weighing their options and the potential risk involved. John was the first to lean forward. "My name's John," he said evenly. "I'll be honest, it looks like you've built something solid here. Safety in numbers makes sense. Sleeping without having to rotate watches every couple hours does sound nice." A few quiet nods circled the table. "But what exactly counts as contributing?" John continued. "What would you expect from us?" Richard smiled faintly, as if he'd been waiting for that question. "That depends entirely on what you're capable of and what you're willing to do," he replied. "Take me, for example. I'm not a fighter, never was. My profession is civic arbiter. Before all this, I was a county clerk. Paperwork, mediation, municipal organization." He gestured vaguely toward himself. "Hardly built for combat." Sage kept his expression neutral, but he filed that away. "So I don't scout. I don't man watchtowers. I don't fight," Richard continued. "Instead, I organize. I assign tasks. And I coordinate the camp's efforts. And the system rewards me for it." Professor Sanders straightened slightly. "Rewards you, how?" "With experience," Richard said pleasantly. "If I direct someone to complete a task aligned with the settlement's growth, I gain experience once that task is completed." Professor Sanders' brows lifted. "Could you please clarify?" Richard nodded. "Take the palisade wall, for example. A few days ago, I assigned 5 of our stronger members to gather long, straight logs. I then directed someone with basic engineering knowledge to draft a layout. After that, I organized a digging crew to prepare the foundation." He spread his hands. "Each completed task granted me a small amount of experience. But when the wall itself was finished..." His smile widened slightly. "That resulted in multiple level gains at once." A low murmur passed through the group. "That's efficient," Professor Sanders said thoughtfully. A non-combat leveling pathway through structured settlement development. Exactly, Richard said. Sage watched him carefully. The man didn't hesitate one bit. No hint of stammer or nervousness. His confidence felt well practiced. And everyone here contributes in some way? John asked. They do, Richard replied. Because everyone here is bound by cooperation. That made several heads snap up. Bound? Nadine asked. Richard nodded. System-enforced contracts. The air in the room shifted. Explain, Professor Sanders said immediately. My profession allows me to draft and invoke contracts backed by the authority of the system, Richard said smoothly. Anyone who joins Camp Persistence signs a simple agreement. They will not harm another member of the camp. Sage's jaw tightened slightly. And if they do? Kranti asked. Richard's voice remained calm. The system punishes them proportionally. Minor harm results in minor penalties such as a loss of levels. Severe violations escalate accordingly. You mean death, Sage said flatly. Richard met his gaze without flinching. If someone murders a member of this camp, yes. The system will execute the offender. Silence fell over the table. Professor Sanders extended a hand. May we see this contract? Richard smiled again and flicked his fingers. A sheet of parchment materialized in his hand as if plucked from thin air. He laid it on the table for all to see. By entering into this binding agreement, you consent to the following terms, enforced by the authority of the system. While you are recognized as a member of Camp Persistence, you shall not cause harm, injury, or death whether directly or indirectly to another member of the camp. Violation of this pact shall incur system-enforced punishment proportional to the harm inflicted, to be measured and mirrored upon the perpetrator. This contract is non-transferable, automatically active upon acceptance, and shall remain in effect for the duration of your membership within Camp Persistence and for 48 hours following your departure. By signing below, you have accepted these terms. Sage read it twice. The wording was precise. 48 hours after departure. Professor Sanders asked. Richard inclined his head. For everyone's safety. I have no issue with people leaving. This is a voluntary settlement. But I cannot allow someone to walk away, gather allies, and return the next day to slaughter us. The grace period ensures transparency. If someone leaves, we know. And we prepare accordingly. The explanation sounded reasonable. Sage leaned back slowly, studying Richard's face. This place offered safety, structure, and stability. It was everything people would want after days of chaos and near-death experiences. So why did it feel like stepping into a cage? Richard looked around the table, reading the tension in the air. He offered a polite smile and rose smoothly to his feet. I can see you all have a lot to think about, he said, brushing a crease from his sleeve. Take your time. Talk it over. There's no pressure either way. He stepped back from the table and moved toward the door, pausing only to glance over his shoulder. I'll be just outside when you're ready. With that, he slipped out and pulled the door closed behind him, leaving the group in silence. The contract sat between them, heavy despite the flimsy parchment it was printed on. Sage didn't touch it. Didn't say anything at first. He could feel the group weighing the offer, turning it over in their minds. John broke the silence first. It's a fair deal. Honestly, it's safer than anything we've had so far. Professor Sanders nodded in agreement. And the structure here could be beneficial. It's not every day the system gives us a tool to enforce order. Kranti and John exchanged glances, then looked to Sage. Look, John said, I get why you're hesitant. But think about Kyle. He's down a leg. He's not going to be mobile for a while. We can't just carry him around while monsters try to rip us apart. Kranti nodded. We can't leave him. And having a base to come back to after grinding levels in the swamp? That could be a huge advantage. We fight hard, then recover here. Sage frowned. And how long until we get soft? Until this place becomes a crutch? A cage. It's not forever, Nadine said gently. We stay, rest, and recover. John and Kranti are right, Kyle isn't going anywhere anytime soon and we can't just leave him here alone. Professor Sanders folded his hands. Survival comes first. Sage looked at each of them in turn. Kranti. John. Professor Sanders. Nadine. They all looked steady, certain this was the right decision. Nadine gave him a slight nod. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. All right, he said quietly. We can try it. John stood, walked to the door, and opened it. Richard, he called. The man was standing just a few meters away, hands folded behind his back. As if he'd been waiting. He returned to the room with a smooth, measured pace. Have you all decided? Sage met his gaze. We'll stay. For now. Richard smiled. Then let's make it official. One by one, they stepped forward and signed the contract. Each signature glowed faintly before vanishing into the parchment. As Richard collected the completed agreement, his smile didn't falter. Welcome to Camp Persistence. The firelight had died down to embers. Camp Persistence was quiet, most of its inhabitants either asleep or on rotation for the night watch. Sage stood near the perimeter wall, arms crossed, eyes scanning the treetops just beyond the palisade. The air was still, but his thoughts weren't. Heavy footsteps approached from behind. Sage turned. A tall man stepped into view, broad-shouldered and muscular, with a clean-shaven head that reflected the dim moonlight. His face was hard, but not unfriendly. Name's Earl, the man said in a low voice. Mind if I stand with you a bit? Sage shrugged. Free clearing. Earl stood beside him, eyes following Sage's, out into the swampy trees. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Earl asked, quietly, what do you think of this place? Sage turned slightly, narrowing his eyes. Why? Earl let out a slow exhale. 'Cause I saw it in your face earlier. You're not buying the act either. Sage said nothing. Earl continued. I knew the second you stepped through the gate. You're not like the others. You're not taken in by Richard's polished words and promises. And I've got to say I'm glad I'm not the only one. Sage gave him a sideways look. You planning something? Earl shook his head. Not like that. I just can't stay here. Something about this place feels wrong. Off. Too perfect, too controlled compared to the tutorial we were thrown into. We're in a survival scenario and these people are building a utopia. Doesn't make sense. Sage's jaw tensed. He'd had the same thought more than once. My group, Earl went on, they're happy here. Comfortable. They don't want to leave, and I'm not going to drag them out. But me? I can't stay. My guts never steered me wrong, and it's screaming at me now. He turned and looked Sage in the eye. I saw the same doubt in you. So I figured I'd ask, want to come with me? I'm heading out at first light. Just me. But I wouldn't mind the company of someone else who hasn't fallen under whatever spell this place is casting. Esmeralda's words hung in the air. How are you even alive? Cade had no answer. He'd asked himself that same question so many times since the system arrived. The ashen baptism alone should have ended him. The rite of lightning, even more so. Add in the toad mucus, the burns, the cracked skin, the sleepless nights spent half mad with pain and hunger, it should have been more than enough to break a person. But here he was. He exhaled shakily and brought up his resource pools with a flick of thought. HP, 32/350. SP, 28/320. MP, 260/260. Better than it had been, but not by much. He wasn't dying. But something bothered him. His mana was full again. Why? That kind of recovery shouldn't have happened that fast, not with how wrecked the rest of his body was. Why was his mana always the first to recover? He closed the window with a mental command. What did you see? He asked the old frog. He tried to sound calm, but his voice was too dry, too cracked to fully mask the tension behind it. Esmeralda's cloudy eyes studied him again, slow and deliberate. Her fingers curled around her staff and planted it gently beside her. I saw channels that were fried and frayed, she said, dry and cracked beds where rivers should flow. Her tone wasn't cruel, just measured. Like someone who had seen thousands of possibilities and was now seeing one more that didn't quite belong. Our tadpoles harden their pathways in the jelly, she continued. Younglings deepen them when they climb from the pools. Even those burned by ash return with something left to carry a trickle. But you. She stopped, her throat sac rising with a breath. She looked away. Cade tried to smile, but it came out crooked. So, that's bad. In our measures, it is not only bad, she replied. It is impossible. Her gaze returned to his face. And yet, here you sit. Asking for lessons. A quiet beat passed between them, thick with unspoken weight. Cade looked down at his hands, remembering how they had lit up during the lightning storm. Burned. Rebuilt. Or maybe just barely held together. Harsh truths are not always kind, Esmeralda said. But they are better companions than lies. Cade nodded once. He didn't trust his voice just then. There was a strange relief in hearing it spoken aloud. That something in him was broken. That the reason the system's automatic core formation had failed wasn't just random. That it wasn't all in his head. He'd felt it since the beginning. The sense that others had been given something, and he had been left half-formed. Now someone else could see it too. What now? He asked. Esmeralda tapped her staff gently on the mat. Her throat fluttered with a tired croak. Second Elder Verosk has asked me to teach you our ways, she said, her voice quiet. So I shall. Hope surged in Cade's chest. But, she added, I will not waste what little time I have left in this realm trying to teach the hopeless. Her gaze didn't waver, but her voice softened slightly. I do not have the breath to nurse a creature who should not have lived this long. Cade's shoulders sagged, the spark of hope already flickering. He managed a small nod. I will loan you tools, Esmeralda continued, tools so simple even a hatchling can use them if they have the aptitude. You will try them without my hand to steady yours. Cade took a breath and met her gaze again. Understood. Esmeralda adjusted her grip on her staff, the wood creaking softly beneath her fingers. From what I saw, you lack affinity for any of our paths, she said plainly. Your body bears scars from the ash, and your channels, her cloudy eyes narrowed. They are feeble. Ragged. They cannot carry enough essence to attempt our techniques. Cade felt the words land in his chest. He tried not to show it, but Esmeralda's throat gave a small, sympathetic croak, as if she had seen straight through the thin veneer of his composure. However, she continued, if there is even a guttering spark in you we will find it. She lifted her chin slightly, throat sac swelling. Then without warning she leaned her head back, opened her mouth, and reached 2 fingers past her tongue. Cade leaned back, startled that she was going to puke on him. Her fingers vanished past her teeth, deeper than any normal mouth should allow, as though she were reaching into a hollow space carved behind her throat. When her hand finally emerged, she carried something impossibly delicate between her fingers. A thin cord of shimmering twine. Ethereal, translucent, glistening like dew stretched across spider silk at dawn. A tiny knot sat in its center, glowing faintly like a captive firefly. Cade stared. You keep that in your mouth? No, Esmeralda said, as though the answer were obvious. It rests in a storage fold. A pocket between breaths. She gave him no further clarification, and Cade wasn't brave enough to request any. This is a wisp guide skein, she announced, holding it gingerly between 2 fingers. Even the most stunted beginner can use it if they possess the Mistweaver's aptitude. As he stared at the delicate skein in Esmeralda's fingers, Cade activated Identify. Wisp Guide Skein, a patterned guide for controlled mist shaping. He had a dozen questions, crowding and jostling for priority, but Esmeralda had already slipped into demonstration mode. She took one end of the skein in each hand and drew them taut. The string stretched, shimmering faintly. Mist weaving is 2 workings, she explained. Inside, you draw essence along your channels and pool it in your palms. Outside, you shape what leaves through the gates in your palms into the pattern that births mist. Cade blinked. Gates. Esmeralda ignored him. The wisp guide forms the outer pattern for you, she went on. All you must do is feed essence steadily into each end. Her fingertips paled slightly as she began channeling. Cade watched, mesmerized, as a shimmering flow ran along the cord, traveling inward from both sides until it reached the knot. The knot unfurled like a blooming flower, spreading into an intricate sigil that hovered a hair above the string. The skein shifted, weaving itself into a looping figure 8. A thin ribbon of mist spun outward from the center, delicate, spiraling upward before dissipating in the warm air. Cade felt his breath catch. He had seen this before. The black frog in the vision, the one who had breathed life into an entire wasteland, had woven mist as easily as letting out a breath. This is a training tool, Esmeralda said. A crutch to teach children. Then she abruptly flooded the skein with too much essence. The knot snapped shut with a sharp ting, the cord stiffening. A cold hiss escaped as frost crackled along the line and nipped at her thumbs. She eased back, and the skein softened, returning to its pliable, shimmering form. If you push too much, she said, it locks. If you trickle too little, nothing forms. She extended the skein toward him. Cade accepted it gingerly. It weighed almost nothing, yet he felt a strange connection to it, like it expected something of him. His mind raced. What is essence? Is it mana? Stamina? Something else? How do I push it through a channel I can't even feel? What happens if I break this thing? Does it ever get cleaned? He swallowed all the questions. Esmeralda had made it clear she wasn't here to hold his hand. Stay under the eaves, she said. Practice until I return. You will not leave this pad while you hold the skein. She didn't wait for him to agree. She simply turned and shuffled away, staff tapping rhythmically as she approached the group of spawnlings gathering at the pavilion's edge, leaving Cade alone with the mist-weaving tool and the unsettling knowledge that his channels were a patchwork of broken lines and empty spaces. Okay, Cade told himself, settling onto the reed mat with the skein draped across his palms. Here's your starting place. He exhaled once, slow and shaky, and positioned the wisp guide the way Esmeralda had shown him, with the ends held lightly, center not resting between his thumbs. Move your essence, he instructed his body. Nothing happened. Not a tingle. Not a pulse. Not even the faint suggestion that something could move. Cade frowned. Okay, that didn't work. He tried again. Harder. Still nothing. He didn't even know what he was supposed to be moving. His resource sheet didn't list anything called essence. He had health, stamina, and mana. No essence. No mystical frog-compatible energy pool. Just the basic system stats he'd been struggling to survive with. Maybe it's something these frogs have that humans don't. He racked his memory for something, anything that could give him a clue. And then it hit him. The vision. The black-skinned frog meditating in the ash, her body humming with internal flow. He had felt it, something circling through her channels, looping in a deep rhythm. The sensation had been faint, indistinct, but real. He'd spent what felt like hours in her skin. Enough to know that something had been moving. He straightened his posture, crossing his legs the way she had, spine tall, shoulders relaxed. He rested the skein in his palms. Okay. Think. Ignore everything else. Focus. He let the world recede. The croaks and trills of the swamp softened. The gentle sway of the walker lily beneath him faded. Even the distant sounds of Esmeralda instructing the spawnlings blurred away. He focused on his body. He felt the warm rush of blood moving through his veins. He felt the steady, heavy thump of his heartbeat. He felt the rise and fall of his chest with every breath. But beyond that? Nothing. No echo of essence. No rhythmic pulse like the frogs. No deep internal river he could draw from. Minutes passed as his sense of time thinned until he couldn't tell if the sun had shifted or the lily pad beneath him had moved. Still nothing. Frustration coiled up his spine. Why can't I do this? Why can't I feel anything? Esmeralda said even children can mistweave with this thing. So what does that make me? Less than a child? A stunted hatchling? A waste of time? His jaw clenched. His shoulders tightened. He felt himself folding inward, hunching, his breath constricting. His mind spiraled. Maybe this was pointless. Esmeralda had already decided he was a lost cause. Maybe he really didn't have any channels worth saving. Maybe. Stop. Cade caught himself. He slowly lifted his shoulders, then dropped them. He inhaled deeply through his nose, letting the air fill him. He exhaled through his mouth, letting the tension bleed out with it. Once, twice, again. He straightened. He reset. He returned to the posture he remembered so vividly, the posture of the frog that breathed life into ash. That was when he felt it, a familiar tug at the edge of his mind, a subtle system ping trying to force its way into his awareness. A notification attempting to open. He pushed it away. Not now. He could almost feel the internal flow waiting for him, just beyond reach. A shape. A rhythm. Something familiar yet elusive. It was close. It was right there. He inhaled, steady and controlled. He exhaled, matching the memory of the frog's slow ritual breath. Just a little further, he thought. Come on. Come on. And his focus sharpened to a point. Something inside him shifted and responded. He reached for it yet held still. The sensation was faint, like the tingling awareness of a limb returning from numbness, but it was there. A motion that didn't come from muscle or blood. A whisper running parallel to the pulse of his heart. Not quite physical. Not quite imagined. He didn't know what to call it, but it was some sort of flow. It wasn't fast. It wasn't strong. But it moved. He let himself fall into it. Each breath helped. Not forced or frantic, just slow, steady inhales, drawing the air into his lungs, letting the rise and fall of his chest become a metronome. In. Out. In. Out. And as his breath deepened, so too did the sensation. The flow inside him gathered faint weight, spreading outward in faint trails. Like warm water dripping into dry soil. Cade's mind wandered not with doubt this time, but with a memory. His anatomy class. A lecture he had half slept through back in college. He remembered the circulation diagrams, the closed-loop system that powered the human body. Deoxygenated blood returned to the heart, passed through the lungs, picked up fresh oxygen, then was pumped back out through the arteries. The aorta split and branched and fed the entire body, arterioles to capillaries, capillaries to cells. Gas exchange. Nutrients. Waste removal. The loop continued, always cycling, always moving. What if this was the same? Not blood but something deeper. Something more subtle. He imagined that same network again but superimposed. Not veins and arteries, but metaphysical threads. Invisible channels that didn't carry oxygen, but potential. It didn't matter that he didn't have a stat for it. He could feel something moving now. He thought back again to the black-skinned frog from the vision. The rhythm in her body had mirrored breath. Flowing in stillness. Power without motion. She had done it for hours without strain. Not forcing it, just letting it happen. Cade opened himself to that rhythm. He didn't chase it. He didn't force it. He allowed it. The system pinged again, this time more insistent, trying to demand attention, but he ignored it. His body wasn't screaming as loudly now. His mind had quieted. And beneath it all, something moved. It started in his chest just beneath his sternum. A gathering, a weightless center, like a coil of warmth unwinding. It slipped along his spine, crept down his arms, and pooled in his palms. He immediately felt the difference. The ends of the wisp guide tingled in his hands, as if the cord knew something was coming. Still holding the flow steady, Cade stood slowly, carefully. His body ached, but he didn't let it pull his focus. He moved into the posture he remembered from the black frog's final movement. The pose that had ended her night-long cultivation. The one that had seemed like a kind of release. He brought his feet beneath him. Spread his toes. Felt the mat beneath his soles. He lifted his hands high, the skeins ends trailing upward, and slowly opened them apart as he exhaled. This is it, he thought. It has to be. Something caught. A hum deep in his arms. A thread of energy curved from one hand to the other through the skein. He didn't see it. But he felt it. Closer. Closer. And then it all came crashing down as a clammy hand touched his shoulder. Cade nearly jumped out of his skin. Every sense roared back into his awareness like a dam breaking. The low croaks and creaks of the village, once background noise, now blared as if the entire swamp had erupted in song. The steady rhythm of the walker lily beneath his feet, once a soothing pulse, now felt like a drunken earthquake. His body swayed, and it took every ounce of will not to fall over. Heat blasted his face, the hearth, he realized, and cool, damp air slid across his back like a sheet of ice. His limbs flared with aches he'd managed to forget, and his goddamn stomach let out a gurgle that could have registered on a seismograph. Hadn't he just eaten? He opened his eyes in a daze. Esmeralda stood in front of him, her brow furrowed with concern, her cloudy eyes narrowing slightly as she studied his expression. She opened her mouth and spoke. Or no, not spoke. A chirp. Short and musical. More followed. Words, clearly, but Cade couldn't understand them. Her mouth moved, her throat sac flexed, but the mucus translation effect wasn't working. Cade blinked. Shouldn't it be translated? He stared dumbly, trying to will her voice into something he could understand. Nothing. Not even a fragment. Esmeralda kept talking, but all Cade heard was meaningless frog noises. Cade blinked and stared at Esmeralda. She chirped again, short, musical, but still completely incomprehensible. What the hell? Why couldn't he understand her? He opened his mouth to ask, but she was already moving, her cloudy eyes narrowing slightly as she stepped forward and took hold of his hands. Her webbed fingers turned them over with surprising delicacy, inspecting the wisp guide skein still resting in his grip. She frowned. With a sigh, she plucked the skein from his hands, opened her mouth, and gently placed the delicate cord back into the space behind her throat. Cade didn't know if it was some kind of extra-dimensional storage or just weird frog anatomy, but either way, that mystery would have to wait. Esmeralda motioned firmly for him to sit. He obeyed, albeit reluctantly, lowering himself onto the rough reed mat once more. His mind was still spinning. He had been so close to something. So close to touching something real. So close to a breakthrough. And now it was gone. He looked to the hearth and only then noticed that there was a proper fire going now. Not just the lazy, smoldering embers from earlier, but flickering flame and steady heat. Several skewers were resting around the stone ring, held in place by forked sticks. Something sizzled over the fire, roasting and dripping in the heat. Esmeralda reached forward, picked up one of the skewers, and handed it to him with a firm nod. Cade blinked down at the offering. It was crispy on the outside, blistered from the flames, and it smelled vaguely of smoke. The thing on the stick was impaled like a hot dog, except he was pretty sure hot dogs didn't have retractable barbed mouths. A quick identify gave him the name. Juvenile swamp leech, small parasite found in shallow reeds. It tracks its prey through heat and vibration. Cade's stomach growled. He stared at the leech. The leech stared back with shriveled black eyes and a crackling, roasted body. Yeah. Okay. Sure. He took a hesitant bite. The skin was crisp like overdone chicken skin, but as soon as his teeth broke through, a warm gush of metallic, muddy-tasting fluid hit his tongue. Cade did his best not to gag. It wasn't the worst thing he'd eaten, but it definitely wouldn't win any awards. Esmeralda, for her part, was already digging into her own skewer, seemingly unbothered by the taste. She sat on the same thick reed mat as before, the one nearest the fire. Cade sat beside her, chewing slowly. It wasn't as good as the insects, fruit and seeds he'd been given during his talk with Verosk, but it was food. His body didn't care how it tasted, it just wanted calories. He glanced around the pavilion. The little frogs from earlier were gone. The open space that had once hummed with quiet, curious energy now felt empty. Maybe the spawnlings had gone home to eat? That would make sense, as it was probably lunchtime. But then he looked outside. It was almost dark. The dim light filtering through the mist and vines wasn't bright at all. In fact, it looked like it was right after dusk. Hadn't it been just after dawn when Esmeralda gave him the skein? Without any real way to tell how much time had passed, he gave up trying to guess and let his thoughts drift to something he could control. The system had pinged him while he was deep in concentration. He pulled up his system notifications with a mental command. Ding! You have gained the meditation skill. Meditation, common, enter a trance that severs awareness of the outside world to accelerate stamina and mana recovery. Cade froze, the half-eaten skewer of roasted swamp leech resting in front of his open mouth. Wait, how had he gained the meditation skill? He quickly swallowed and reread the notification to make sure he hadn't misread. There was no level up message to accompany the skill gain, he was still a level 9 human. It had just happened. Meditation had been one of the potential skills offered to him during his race evolution. He'd passed on it at the time in favor of identify. But somehow he had gained the skill just now. A small grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. He had hypothesized that it was possible to gain skills outside of what the system offered. He had no idea how repeatable that was, or what the rules were, but it gave him hope that not everything had to be handed to him. Then the second notification slid into place. Ding! Congratulations! You have upgraded meditation to hyper-focused meditation. Hyper-focused meditation, uncommon, enter a trance that severs awareness of the outside world, accelerating stamina and mana recovery. While active, cognition collapses around a single topic, boosting clarity and analysis at the risk of losing track of time. Cade blinked. Oh! He thought. Well, that explained some things. He stared at the new description. That was exactly what had happened. He'd fallen into a trance so deep that time disappeared, his surroundings vanished, and even his bodily needs had gone quiet. He'd been completely locked in on one thing, figuring out how to move his so-called essence. And it worked. Sort of. It also explained the darkness. He hadn't been training for an hour or two. He'd lost the entire day. This wasn't lunch, it was likely the last meal of the day. The froglings hadn't gone off to nap or eat, they had gone home. Class was over. He'd been so deep in focus he hadn't noticed any of it. His smile faded slightly as he considered the implications. He felt that he could easily lose himself in that state again. The fact that he hadn't passed out from hunger or dehydration was probably a fluke considering the state of his body. Or maybe Esmeralda had been watching and pulled him out before he hurt himself. I need to be careful with this, he thought. I could see myself focusing so much that I accidentally starved to death just trying to learn things. Maybe it was best not to use hyper-focused meditation again. Not until his body was in better condition. And definitely not unless someone was nearby to pull him out if things got dangerous. Still, there was something deeply satisfying about it. He'd gained and upgraded a skill on his own. That meant that both gaining skills and upgrading them weren't limited to some arbitrary system milestones. They could be earned and the system would recognize the accomplishment. That line of thinking sparked about a dozen new ideas, but Cade forced himself to shelve them. For now, he had food in front of him and a warm fire beside him. He needed to finish eating and recover. He took another bite of leech. The taste wasn't any better than before. Cade had just finished chewing another mouthful of swamp leech when Esmeralda gestured toward the fire, then to the remaining skewers, and then to Cade. It took a second, but Cade pieced it together she was offering him the rest. He gave her a small nod of thanks, and she gave one in return, already reaching for her staff and settling into her sitting posture by the hearth. It wasn't exactly a feast, but his body didn't care. Every bite of the roasted parasite was another step toward rebuilding his strength. The taste still had that iron mud punch, but now that he was past the initial revulsion, it wasn't too bad. The fire popped softly as Cade worked through the last of the leeches. The flames had burned lower now, casting long shadows across the pavilion and dim orange light on the woven reed mats. Esmeralda didn't speak or croak. She just sat there, watching the embers and occasionally glancing over at him, as if making sure he didn't pass out face first into his food. Cade appreciated the silence. It was a strange, almost sacred quiet. And it was only then, as his hunger began to ease, that the exhaustion hit him in full. Every breath was harder to draw. Every blink slower. He blinked again and realized the last skewer was in his hand finished. Esmeralda stood. She tapped the end of her staff against the mat. Cade stared at her for a moment, then back at the mat. Sleep, he guessed aloud. She gave a slow blink. A very deliberate one. Yet. That meant sleep. He didn't argue. The mat was scratchy and lumpy, and he doubted it had ever been cleaned in its entire existence, but it might as well have been a luxury mattress in a five-star hotel. He lay down with a sigh, rolled onto his side, and didn't even bother with a good night. Even if he'd wanted to stay up and reflect on everything that had happened today, his body had no intention of cooperating. He was unconscious within seconds. Esmeralda remained seated long after the human succumbed to sleep. The moment Cade's breathing eased into the slow, uneven rhythm of deep rest, she let out a soft croak, half weary, half contemplative, and rested both hands atop her staff. The pavilion around her was quiet now. The last of the day's warmth clung to the wood, and the embers in the hearth pulsed in a slow rhythm. She watched him in the dim firelight. Small. Fragile. Raw in ways she had not seen in her many cycles. He was unexpected. Very unexpected. She drew a long breath through her nostrils, letting it fill her old lungs. With the exhale, the thoughts she had avoided all day finally settled on her shoulders. What are you? She had given him the wisp guide skein, expecting what she always expected from the hopeless, a little fumbling, a little confusion, and eventually resignation. Normally, a youngling lacking aptitude would bring the skein back within minutes, defeated, embarrassed, sometimes even angry. Cade did none of these things. He had simply sat there for hours upon hours. Completely motionless aside from his deep, steady breaths. She could sense his focus was tighter than the most discipline-driven tadpoles. She had checked on him several times. Yet every time she approached, Cade had been locked in that trance-like stillness. His eyes closed, shoulders lowered, and muscles slack. Not sleeping but submerged so deeply within that she could not pull a whisper of awareness from him. She had sensed the faintest thread moving within him. Not essence, no, she would stake her staff on that. What ran through the frogs of the mists was essence refined by breath and practice. But the human, Cade, possessed some other current. Distant and weak but persistent. A thread in a dried-up riverbed. A spark buried in ash. Something old and broken but stubbornly alive. And he had tried to braid that thread into the skein. Esmeralda lifted the staff slightly and traced the engraved egg patterns with her thumb as she thought. He almost broke the skein. The moment she had seen Cade stand hands pressed together, chest expanding, she knew something was happening. The energy around him shifted. Not fully visible to her dimming senses, but present. A pulse misaligned with the swamp's natural rhythm. And then he began to draw his hands apart. The skein responded far too strongly. Its ends shimmered with tension. The knot stretched thin. Filaments strained as if on the brink of unraveling. A hatchling shouldn't have been able to push enough essence to disturb it at all, much less stretch it toward failure. That was what frightened her. For a brief, impossible instant, she sensed something vast brushing at the gates in Cade's palms, not essence exactly but some alien force that did not belong to this realm. If she had let him continue, the skein would have ruptured, its inner runes shredded, its guiding weave snapped. And if a wisp guide skein broke while being channeled? Esmeralda tightened her grip on her staff. No. She had been right to intervene. Even if doing so had broken the moment of understanding the human had been reaching for. She closed her eyes, feeling the echoes of her own guilt. She knew that expression he had worn when startled from the trance. The raw hurt of someone dragged away from a revelation. She had felt it herself many cycles ago, when her own teacher had swatted her staff against the back of her head for attempting a missed call before she was ready. Breakthroughs were delicate things. Still, it was better that Cade lose a single insight than risk having his untempered essence tear open the skein and possibly rupture his own gates in the process. Her throat sac fluttered with a tired croak. The poor creature had no channels worth speaking of. She had seen them herself frayed to threads, collapsed in on themselves, scarred past any reasonable function. His inner pathways looked like the shattered earth surrounding the Eye of Ash, fissured and lifeless. That he could move at all was astonishing. That he still lived was nothing short of a miracle. No frog in this realm would have survived what happened to him. And yet he had. Pearl had found him curled beneath a discarded ash tortoise shell, half dead, scorched, drained of everything except a stubborn spark of will. Perhaps that was why Verosk spared the boy in the first place. She cast a glance toward the shell lying beside him. Ashen marks still stained its ridges. The Emperor's breath. That alone was enough to kill most living things in a single pass. The Eye of Ash did not spare life. It devoured it. The Ash Emperor, wretched creature that it was, believed itself a savior. A bringer of cleansing through annihilation. Esmeralda's webbed fingers curled at the thought. She had listened to the elder songs long enough to know the truth of that monster. It could never lead this realm to freedom. Only unmaking. She drew another slow breath and returned her gaze to the sleeping human. Cade was frighteningly thin. Every bone pressed against his skin. His limbs, if one could call them that, were more like reeds than proper appendages. How did a creature survive like that? How did it stand, or climb, or endure days wandering through ash? The scars along his arms spoke of lightning that should have killed him outright. Yet he had taken the storm into himself and lived. Perhaps humans simply did not work the way frogs did. Perhaps they were more stubborn than they looked. Her gaze softened as she studied him. He had eaten desperately as someone whose body had long been denied nourishment. She had watched him chew each leech with an almost grateful resignation. He was hurting. And though she would never admit it aloud, something about that stirred an old, aching instinct within her. A memory of tadpoles gathered around her knees. Of decades spent guiding the lost and teaching the stubborn. She had expected a burden, but instead, she had been given a mystery. The next thing Cade knew, a hand was shaking his shoulder. He jerked awake, squinting at the pale morning light bleeding through the slatted ceiling of the pavilion. Esmeralda stood above him, still and silent, her staff resting lightly in one hand. She watched him with that unreadable gaze of hers. Her staff reached out and tapped the butt against the mat beside him with a soft, deliberate thunk. Cade blinked and sat up slowly, joints stiff and muscles throbbing. This was a dull, bearable kind of ache, unlike the sharp pains of yesterday. He blinked the system interface into view and read off his resources. HP, 64/350. SP, 157/320. MP, 260/260. Better than expected. He was now at nearly a quarter of his total health and almost half of his stamina too. Of course his mana remained full. He didn't know why that part unsettled him. It just did. Like something was off that he didn't quite understand. He dismissed the window and focused back on the present. Esmeralda had already turned and was walking. She paused only once at the edge of the pavilion and looked back. She gestured. Come. Cade hesitated. His mind, once slow with sleep, started racing. Was this it? Had he failed? Was she done with him? Sending him away? Kicking him out? He hadn't exactly succeeded yesterday. But he'd tried. Didn't that count? No. He shoved the thoughts aside. It didn't matter. Whatever this was, he would face it. He stood, wincing slightly as soreness crawled through his body. His balance wobbled. Every step sent another complaint up through his spine. He stepped forward, barefoot on woven reed and wood, and followed Esmeralda into the pale light of the waking swamp. He followed Esmeralda down the root stair spiraling from the edge of the Walker Lily's pad, every step reminding him that his body wasn't close to ready. The descent was longer than he remembered, maybe it only felt that way because his knees kept threatening to buckle. His shell shield wasn't with him. Esmeralda had made a sharp motion back in the pavilion, a firm gesture that made it clear he was to leave it behind. That left him exposed, and he didn't like it. Down below, the swamp was waking. The first time Cade had seen the frog cultivator's village, it had been shrouded in night, all shadow and silver mist. Now, under the early daylight, the Walker Lilies revealed their strange majesty. Each massive pad floated high above the forest floor, resting atop a towering stalk that creaked and shifted as it moved. From this vantage, Cade could see how the pads cleared the treetops entirely, drifting slowly but with deliberate intent. Dozens of Walker Lilies dotted the area, each with their own occupants and structures. Some of the platforms held training spaces. Others hosted pools filled with bioluminescent algae. The teaching pavilion, he realized, was among the tallest, situated near the village's rear. And all of it was moving. The entire village was crawling forward, step by step, in the direction of a vast thunderstorm that loomed on the horizon. Its clouds were distant but massive, pulsing with flashes of multicolored lightning. Behind them, the swamp left in the walker's wake was alive. Rich, fecund, bursting with moss and flowering vines and darting birds that were too fast for Cade to identify. A trail of life left behind by the village's migration. He struggled to keep pace. Esmeralda navigated the terrain with effortless familiarity, her staff rarely touching the ground, her steps never misjudged. She knew where the roots thickened, where the mud turned treacherous, where the sinkholes waited. Cade did not. Twice he sank ankle-deep in swamp mud. Once, he tripped over a vine that moved as he stepped on it. And when he tried to leap over what looked like a shallow puddle, he missed and plunged headfirst into surprisingly deep water. Esmeralda never looked back, so he kept moving, trying to keep up. They pressed forward, deeper toward the village's front where the oldest, largest lilies walked ahead of the others. Cade spotted a familiar golden-shaped Verosk, the second elder, perched motionless atop his shimmering platform like a statue of a god too bored to intervene in mortal affairs. As they approached, the Walker Lily beneath Verosk began to descend. The entire platform slowly lowered to the ground. When it touched the earth, Esmeralda stepped forward and waved Cade along. He now knew what this was. Cade's stomach clenched. The memory of the golden mucus from yesterday was still fresh, and he'd have to go through it again if he wanted to be able to communicate. Esmeralda handed him a thin, wide strip of bark. Cade grimaced. He remembered this part. Pearl had used bark just like this to scrape the mucus from Verosk's back. This time, Cade would be collecting it himself. Verosk croaked deeply and turned slightly to expose the curve of his broad, golden back. His skin shimmered faintly in the filtered light, golden with embedded flecks like glittering ore. If not for the bumpy, wart-covered texture, it might have been beautiful. Cade approached with caution. He was close enough now to see the pattern of pores across the elder's back. He pressed the bark gently and dragged it down. Nothing. Another croak from Verosk, louder. Exasperated. Cade exhaled and tried again, this time pressing harder, putting his body weight into the scrape. The bark shivered in his hand, and then there it was. Golden mucus welled from the pores, thick and slow. It had a strange, almost luminous sheen to it. The scent hit him next, sweet and metallic. Like warm honey poured over a copper pan. He nearly retched thinking about swallowing it again. He gathered enough for a single swallow and stepped back. The bark was slick and trembling in his hands. Verosk watched him with patient, lidless eyes. Cade met his gaze, nodded faintly, and braced himself. It's just warm honey. Just warm honey. He pinched his nose, closed his eyes, and tilted the bark up. The mucus oozed across his tongue, thick and cloying. He forced it down, fighting every gag reflex that tried to rebel. It slid down his throat and hit his stomach as the world began to twist. Warmth, cold and warm again cycled from his guts. A spiraling current moved through him. Lights flickered behind his eyelids. Gold motes swirled in the dark. Then Veros croaked once more. And Cade's vision exploded into violet lightning as the golden motes swallowed him once more. Cade didn't jerk or scream this time. The shock of being pulled into another body, another life was still jarring, but he braced for it now. He let the sensation wash over him instead of fighting it. He stood on cracked earth, heat radiating up from the ground in slow, pulsing waves. The air tasted of dust and something burnt. The body he inhabited was smaller, more lithe, and balanced low to the ground. The black frog. Her limbs moved with careful purpose as she trudged through the desolation. Cade felt her weight shift through her hips and spine. He felt the dryness of her throat. He had panicked last time, wasted half the vision wondering if he was dying, hallucinating, or somehow becoming this frog. This time he understood what was happening. He was here to observe and learn from this frog. The frog reached the same barren clearing as before, a patch of flattened earth that carried no wind or signs of life. Something about the emptiness here was deliberate, a chosen void. She sat. Her stance was rigid, meditative, yet not as peaceful as the first time he witnessed this vision. There was tension coiled through every limb, through every muscle. Cade recognized that feeling. Pressure waiting for a point of release. The day turned to night as the black frog sat motionless. Cade focused inward with her and it felt as if time slowed down to a crawl. He felt the energy, the same energy he had sensed vaguely last time. Only now it was like a haze was lifted. It was a circulation in her pathways. A cycle. It started in her core just below and behind her navel. Energy pulsed outward from it, riding up the spine, branching through invisible channels into her limbs. Cade felt it flow down her arms and legs, into her fingers and toes. Then it slithered back, returning through those same channels, converging once again into the core. Again. And again. And again. It synced with her breathing, it pulsed like her heartbeat. Was this what the frogs called essence? Cade briefly wondered before shaking off the urge to try and analyze. Right now he needed to just observe, to hold the sensations in his mind. Cycles passed throughout the night. Minutes turned to hours, and although time seemed to move at a crawl, dawn still approached. When the first rays of light shone onto the wasteland, the frog shifted. She rose fluidly onto her feet, arms lifting into the elongated pose Cade remembered. Only now he could feel the internal mechanics of it, the subtle tilting of the pelvis, the tightening of the abdomen, the lengthening of the spine. She shaped her body into a vessel for the energy. Time slowed even further, moving down to barely a trickle. Every sound thickened. Every motion stretched. He felt her core tighten, compressing the gathered energy. Then she exhaled. The release coursed through her spine, splitting at the shoulders and hips, rushing to the limbs. But instead of looping back as it did during the night, the energy broke outward. Cade felt it leave, felt it shed its form, felt it change as it exited her skin. Mist. It seeped from her pores, her fingertips, the corners of her mouth soft at first, then building, swelling, expanding until it surrounded her like a cloak. Time ticked forward as Cade felt the energy surging from her core until she was emptied completely. The sudden loss hit Cade. Her core, once full and powerful, now felt drained and aching. For a moment, time paused, nothing moved, and Cade felt the emptiness the black frog now held. Then she inhaled and time snapped forward. Her body accelerated, rushing through the sequence. Cade faintly remembered mist rising, the sky cracking open with violet lightning, the first cold drops of rain falling onto dead soil. Life surged upward in spirals, green shoots piercing earth, leaves unfurling, vines coiling. Then the world tore open with brilliance as the massive tree erupted skyward, its trunk splitting the horizon. The vision dissolved into gold. And Cade fell backward into himself. He was flat on his back now, the firm lily pad supporting his skeletal human frame. Overhead, wide leaves fanned gently in the breeze. Sunlight filtered through in broken patches, catching on drifting pollen and tiny golden motes of the vision still clinging to the air. His body felt hollow, empty, but despite that, he remembered. He held the cycle of the black frog and embedded it in his mind. The flow, the feeling of energy, the release and transformation into mist. He could copy what she did, he knew he could. He just needed another chance with that tool Esmeralda gave him yesterday. Mist weaving. That was the word Esmeralda had used. One of the 3 paths of the frog. He hadn't managed to activate it yesterday, but now. Was that what the vision had been? A demonstration? A lesson, encoded into the mucus? And if so, why did it feel so personal? So visceral? He hadn't just witnessed the technique, he'd felt it, lived it. The compression of energy. The shift from internal to external. The precise moment that energy became mist. And that final, aching emptiness when nothing remained. But before he could follow the thought deeper, a shadow fell across his face. A massive, golden head leaned into view. Verosk. The second elder stared down at him with solemn, unblinking eyes. You live, the frog said, voice deep and resonant. The mucus strikes harder the second time. Cade blinked. His throat was dry, but he managed a small nod. Yeah, he rasped. That was intense. Verosk's eyes crinkled at the corners in what might have been amusement. More will come. That didn't sound comforting. Cade sat up slowly, bracing a hand against the moss as the world shifted back into place. He considered telling them what he saw, but Esmeralda was already turning away. She didn't ask if he was ready. Just affirm back to the pavilion. Lessons begin. Cade stood with effort and followed, though his legs felt boneless. As they left the pad, he glanced over his shoulder at Verosk. Thanks. For the, translation mucus. Verosk let out a low grunt and waved a webbed hand in dismissal. Cade wasn't sure if that was approval or get lost, but either way, it seemed like the end of the conversation. The path back was quiet. Esmeralda walked ahead, her posture straight, her staff tapping the ground every few steps. He trailed behind, still reeling from the second time he's witnessed that vision. Essence becomes mist. After a while, he gathered the nerve to speak. Can I ask something? Esmeralda didn't look back. Ask. Yesterday, you said I had to put my essence into the threads of the skein. That's how it works. But I don't. He hesitated, then pushed forward. I don't even know what that means. I don't think I have essence. Esmeralda stopped walking. She turned her head just slightly, enough that one wide eye met his. That's a stupid thing to say, she said flatly. Everything has essence. It is the first truth. It is how you exist. Cade opened his mouth, but she kept speaking. I saw your channels, remember? When you lay broken and half dead. You have essence. You're just too blind to see it. Then she turned back and kept walking. Cade stood frozen for a beat before scrambling to catch up. Esmeralda's words echoed in Cade's head as they continued walking. You have essence. You're just too blind to see it. He couldn't tell if it was meant as an insult or a lesson. Maybe both. He fell into step behind her, still nursing the strange emptiness left by the vision. The idea that he had something fundamental inside of him but the system had never even noticed dug deep. The frog spoke of it like it was obvious. But the system? The thing that easily took over Earth, transported people to tutorials, and gave them superpowers? Nothing. Cade frowned. Sorry, he said finally. I don't mean to ask dumb questions. I'm just confused. My system screen doesn't show anything like essence. Just health, stamina, and mana. Esmeralda snorted. The sound was harsh, derisive. You think your system knows more than your own body? Cade opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. She glanced over her shoulder at him with an annoyed croak. Where do you think those numbers come from? He blinked. Attributes? Like, vitality gives more health, endurance gives stamina. No, she cut in. Why? Why does vitality matter? Why does endurance give stamina? Why is there a pool to begin with? Cade fell silent. He hadn't thought that far. The system brought so many changes that he just sort of accepted at face value. Health was how much damage he could take. Mana was fuel for magical abilities. Stamina for the body's movement. It all worked. But why did it work? If what Esmeralda had said was true, then the numbers were shadows of something deeper. Something he hadn't been able to see. He glanced down at his own hands, watching the faint twitch of muscle, the tiny tremor from fatigue. Essence was real to these frogs. By the time he looked up again, Esmeralda was 20 paces ahead. He muttered a curse and jogged to catch up, breath still hitching from soreness. She didn't wait. She never waited. He nearly ran into her when she stopped without warning at a small clearing where a brilliant electric blue frog waited beneath a hanging canopy of vines. The frog handed her a rough and heavy-looking sack. Esmeralda took it in both hands. Then, without hesitation, she opened her mouth. The entire sack vanished as she swallowed it whole. Cade stared, but Esmeralda was already walking again. By the time they reached the pavilion and began climbing the route stair back to the platform, Cade had fallen into silence again, deep in thought about what he'd seen in the vision. The black frog's movements, the cycle of energy. The way it poured out of her and transformed into mist. He barely realized they'd arrived under the pavilion's roof until Esmeralda handed a large leaf to Cade. On the leaf were a mix of fruit, dark nuts, and 2 small strips of what looked like dried fungus. "Eat," she said. "You need it." Cade accepted the food, grateful, though he barely tasted the first bite, still deep in thought. "I think I've got it now," he said between chews. "The mist. I think I understand what I'm supposed to do with the skein." Esmeralda didn't smile. "No," she said flatly. "You don't." Cade paused mid-bite. "But You have no aptitude for mist weaving," she said, turning away. That stung more than it should have. Before the disappointment could land too hard, Esmeralda added, almost casually, "Mist weaving is not your path. But perhaps storm-calling is." "Many who cannot weave still walk another path," Esmeralda said before opening her mouth wide. Cade had just enough time to register what she was doing, 2 long fingers sliding down her throat before she pulled something out and held it up between them. It was a glass jar. Not crude glass, but smooth and perfectly clear aside from the faint spirals etched into the surface. Inside, suspended in midair, was a lightning bolt. It twisted and coiled in place, crackling silently, its edges too sharp and too bright to look entirely real. Cade inhaled sharply and promptly choked on the seed he'd been chewing. "What the hell?" he coughed, thumping his chest. "Did you just pull out bottled lightning?" Esmeralda's throat pulsed with what might have been amusement. "This is the storm seed." Cade used identify on the object Esmeralda was holding. Storm seed, an ancient storm kernel suspended in a scripted container. "How?" Cade demanded, staring. "How did you bottle a storm?" "By understanding the laws that bind it," she said lightly. "As our progenitor once did. But that knowledge is too advanced for you." She glanced past him toward the edge of the pavilion, where a small group of young frogs waited in loose formation. Their eyes were bright, their attention half on Cade and half on Esmeralda's hands. "Oh, copy pie," Esmeralda called. One of the smallest frogs stepped forward. A slender, electric blue youth with alert eyes and a posture that looked like he was slightly nervous. He bowed his head and hopped closer. Esmeralda placed the jar into his hands. "Show us how you call." Oh, copy pie cradled the storm seed carefully, then lifted it toward his throat. The jar looked enormous in his grasp. Cade leaned forward, eyes fixed on the tiny creature. "I cannot call to the storm," Esmeralda said quietly, as if sensing Cade's question before he asked it. "My affinity lies elsewhere." Oh, copy pie, however, was born for this. The blue frog pressed the jar close to his throat. His throat sac expanded, stretching translucent skin until a soft blue glow bloomed beneath it. "While mist weaving has 2 workings," Esmeralda continued. "Storm-calling requires 3. First," she said, "you gather your essence in the chest and throat." Oh, copy pie held still, breath steady. "Second, you infuse that essence into your voice." The glow in the frog's throat brightened. "And third," Esmeralda said, "you issue a command that resonates with the storm." Oh, copy pie croaked long and steady, vibrating through the air as the tiny frog held the note. Inside the jar, the lightning shifted. White bled into blue. The bolt brightened, thickened, and began to move faster. It rattled against the glass as if it were suddenly eager to escape. The longer Oh, copy pie held the note, the more violent the lightning became until finally the frog's voice faltered and cut off. The glow faded from his throat sac and the lightning settled, still crackling faintly. Cade stared. Not only had these frogs bottled lightning, they spoke to it. Commanded it. Mist was one thing. But this? This was a primordial force of nature. The first form of destructive magic he had seen the frogs wield. Cade knew, with absolute certainty, that this was something he had to learn. Oh, copy pie gently lowered the storm seed and, with careful fingers, handed it back to Esmeralda, making sure to keep his distance from Cade as he did. Cade noticed the little frog's wide eyes flick up to him once, then drop just as fast. Cade didn't blame him. He hadn't exactly gone out of his way to make friends with the younger frogs. He still looked like a half-burned skeleton. Not exactly friendly or familiar to these amphibians. And for all Okapi knew, Cade might melt someone's brain just by touching them. Esmeralda accepted the storm seed with both hands. The glass hummed faintly, the lightning inside still flickering with power. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she looked at the jar for a long moment, her long thumbs brushing the edge of the lid with something like reverence. Then she turned and held it out to Cade. He stepped forward and grasped it with both hands. She didn't release it at first. The moment lingered, her eyes watching his, unblinking. Her fingers clung for a few moments longer than necessary, like she wasn't sure he should be holding it after all. Like she was already questioning her decision. Then, slowly, she let go. Cade took the storm seed in both hands. It was lighter than he expected. The static was immediate. A buzz against his palms, humming like 1,000 live electrical wires. The feeling reminded him of the ritual with Akalian and of Sage casting spells through the earth. He narrowed his eyes. Is this mana I'm feeling? Sit, Esmeralda said, her voice low. He obeyed, lowering himself onto the floor of the pavilion with the storm seed cradled gently in his lap. His back ached and his legs were thankful for the rest, but he paid them no mind. His attention was locked on the glass, on the storm he held between his hands. This is your lesson today, Esmeralda said. You will hold it. You will gather your essence in your chest and throat and you will find the resonance. If you have the affinity, the storm seed will answer. Cade nodded once. Esmeralda didn't wait for questions. She turned, already walking toward the edge of the pavilion where the other young frogs waited. He watched her go, then looked back down at the storm seed. This time, he would succeed. The buzzing static from within the jar made his skin itch, but it wasn't unpleasant. It reminded him of the thunderheads in the distance, ominous and full of tension but not yet willing to strike with their fury. He closed his eyes. Concentrate your essence in the chest and throat. That was what Esmeralda had said. Essence. He still wasn't entirely sure what that meant. The system never mentioned it. There was no stat or resource labeled essence, no bar to track or interface to guide him. But the frogs acted like it was as obvious as breathing. So Cade let his breathing slow. In. Out. In. Out. He let the tension leave his shoulders, then his arms, then his neck. He quieted the voice in his head that wanted to ask how he was supposed to do this or what exactly he was supposed to feel. Instead, he reached for the memory of the black frog from the vision. She had sat still for hours, motionless in the cracked wasteland, breathing in sync with a rhythm Cade hadn't noticed at first. But by the end, he felt it. That cycle. The way energy pulsed out from her core, down her limbs, and returned again. It must have been her essence moving in a pattern. Cade tried to copy it, except he didn't have a core like the black frog. He couldn't feel a wellspring of energy behind his navel. No pulse of power centered in his gut. His thoughts began to spiral. How can I mimic her if I don't have the same structure? What if this is a waste of time? What if I just can't? He clenched his jaw and forced the thoughts away. No. This is not the time. If he couldn't copy her exactly, then he'd adapt. He'd focus on what he did have, on what was in front of him. The storm seed and that static feeling coming off of it. He adjusted his grip, bringing the jar up higher, cradling it close to his upper chest just like Okapi had done. He didn't have a throat sac, but he could at least put it in the same place. He let the buzzing static bleed into his body. As soon as the glass touched the center of his chest, the sensation sharpened. Static crackled across his skin. A soft hum buzzed through his collarbones and crawled up into his throat. It wasn't painful, but it made his nerves light up like someone had carbonated his bloodstream. He latched onto the feeling. He didn't understand it, but he could feel it. He focused on the buzz in his chest, willing it to grow stronger, more defined. Slowly, carefully, he imagined it concentrating like smoke pulled into a bottle. Is this my essence? He wondered, but he didn't let the question distract him. He kept breathing and focused his mind on feeling the sensations. And after a while, he felt a difference. The buzzing in his chest wasn't identical to the buzz from the storm seed, it was close, but not quite the same. Like two notes almost in tune but still not perfectly aligned. This, he realized, was what Esmeralda meant by resonance. They had to match. So Cade focused all of his will on shifting that internal buzz, on changing the frequency inside himself to match the rhythm coming from the storm seed. 2 storms. 2 patterns. 2 pulses. He just had to make them one. At first, nothing happened. Cade held his breath, willing the buzzing in his chest to change, to bend, to move. It refused. The static inside him remained stubborn. A dull, uneven hum that refused to align with the sharper, livelier crackle of the storm seed. His mind raced ahead, demanding the static inside to change. Irritation coiled in his gut, winding tighter with each passing second. His grip on the jar clenched, his will straining until he recognized what was building. Frustration was blooming just beneath the surface. Focus, he told himself. Don't get frustrated. Don't force it. He loosened his grip slightly and let his breathing even out again. Instead of pushing, he paused and listened. He let the sensation in his chest exist without trying to dominate it. And then it shifted, just barely, but enough to be noticeable. The buzzing inside him wavered, trembling like a string pulled too tight and then eased. The change was small, almost imperceptible, but Cade felt it. A flicker of alignment. A whisper of movement in the right direction. He acknowledged the success without latching onto it, then he continued listening and nudging the internal static again. This time it moved more easily. The frequency inside his chest slid closer to the one in the jar. Close enough that the buzzing between them began to answer each other, his chest humming louder as the storm seed's crackle intensified in response. Then, with a soft internal click, they aligned and the static surged. The buzz in Cade's chest and throat swelled until it was indistinguishable from the lightning's hum. For a brief moment, there was no inside or outside, just one unified vibration thrumming through glass and flesh. And then the energy moved. The static flowed outward from his chest, racing down his arms and legs in branching paths, tingling along every nerve before curling back inward. It returned to his throat, pooled, and surged outward again. The cycle repeated, waxing and waning in a steady rhythm. To Cade's surprise, it felt incredible. Each wave of static that passed through him washed away some of the ache clinging to his muscles and bones. The soreness faded, replaced by a crisp, electric clarity. His thoughts sharpened. His body felt lighter, cleaner, renewed. But when the buzz receded, the relief vanished with it. Fatigue rushed back in and pain flared. His limbs felt heavy and dull. Then the cycle surged again and the pain melted away. Cade frowned. Something's not right, some quiet instinct warned. He observed more closely as the cycle continued. When the static intensified inside him, the lightning in the storm seed dimmed. When the energy left his body, the lightning inside the jar brightened. They were exchanging something. Sharing it as it cycled between Cade and the storm seed. Cade's pulse quickened. Instead of letting the cycle continue on its own, he leaned into it. He shortened the gap between surges, gently nudging the static to return faster, stronger. The rhythm tightened and the exchange accelerated. The buzzing grew louder. The relief became intoxicating and the crash afterward more punishing. Faster. Stronger. Again and again he pushed the cycle until a voice deep inside screamed for him to stop. To break the cycle before it spiraled out of control. But another voice, insistent and hungry, urged him onward. If he could just push it far enough, if the cycle became fast enough, intense enough, there would be no separation. No back and forth. No difference between the buzzing in his body and the storm seed. Keep going. Keep pushing. Devour it all. Hours had passed. Esmeralda stood near the edge of the teaching grounds, her staff planted firmly in the mud as she watched the younger frogs repeat their forms. Croak patterns rose and fell in uneven harmony, essence flaring and dimming as the students struggled with their lessons. Her thoughts, however, drifted back to the pavilion. She had left the little human alone with the storm seed. Not because she trusted him, far from it, but because she hadn't expected anything to happen. Without an affinity for storm calling, the storm seed would remain inert. She had seen that outcome countless times. The poor thing could try all he wanted, but at the end of the day, he had no affinity. He would never be able to resonate with the ancestor's seed. Teacher. A small orange frog tugged gently at her staff. Esmeralda looked down. Yes, Laruk. There are lights, the young one said, pointing with a trembling finger. Funny lights. Esmeralda followed the gesture and froze. The pavilion pulsed. Not with the steady, contained glow she might have expected from a successful resonance but with an erratic strobe. Light flashed and vanished in rapid bursts, bright enough to illuminate the pavilion even in the light of day. Her stomach dropped. "That is not resonance," she whispered. She turned and moved, her pace quickening into a hurried stride, then a run, as her heart pounded with unfamiliar urgency. When she reached the pavilion, she stopped short from entering. Cade sat at its center, unmoving, the storm seed pressed against his chest. Its lightning was inexplicably flowing into him. Thin filaments of blue-white energy stretched from the jar and sank into his skin, vanishing beneath charred flesh. The bolt inside the glass had shrunk, reduced to a weak flicker as the human drew it out. "No," Esmeralda croaked in horror. "If the storm seed emptied completely, its lattice would collapse. The ancestor's artifact would be ruined. Worse, if the human couldn't contain what he took in, the backlash would erupt, killing him and everyone nearby." She took a few steps forward but stopped before reaching him. If she touched him now, the lightning would arc. She had no affinity for storm-calling. The storm would not recognize her. If she interrupted whatever was happening, she might kill them both. Then her eyes widened even more as the flow reversed. Multicolored lightning poured out of the human's body and back into the jar in a blinding surge. The storm seed flared brighter than she had ever seen it, light roaring outward until Esmeralda had to shield her eyes. "What are you doing?" she shrieked. The lightning intensified, swelling and vibrating so violently that the glass screamed under the strain. A kaleidoscope of colors lit up the pavilion and the air crackled with power. Then the light dimmed again and once more, the storm flowed back into Cade. Esmeralda lowered her hands from her eyes, staring in disbelief. Never in her many cycles had she seen such a feat. Her kind did not absorb the essence of the storm seed. They did not cycle itself into their body as the human was doing now. Stormicolors influenced storms. They requested the storms to fall and cleanse the desolation, leaving vital essence in the storm's wake. They never became conduits for the storm's fury. She stared slack-jawed as the rhythm accelerated. Each exchange was brighter than the last. The jar glowed, dimmed, glowed again until a sharp, unmistakable sound cut through the thunderous hum. Crack! A hairline fracture split the glass and Esmeralda's breath caught in her throat. Esmeralda made her decision in an instant. Light flared from the cracked jar, the searing crackle of wild essence escaping its bonds. There wasn't time to hesitate. Cade was already as good as dead, but she could still protect the young if the storm seed exploded. She cursed herself as her body moved. She was foolish. Foolish to leave him alone. Foolish to hand over an ancestor's relic to a stranger without supervision. She had thought him harmless. Weak. She had thought nothing would happen. And now this. She flung her tongue forward in a blur of motion. It slapped wetly against the glass of the jar still pressed to Cade's chest. The moment her tongue touched the surface, she retracted and rammed the cracked storm seed deep into the spatial fold of her throat sac. The glass vanished between her jaws, swallowed whole into the pocket dimension inside of her, a fold of space meant for storage and safekeeping. She hoped, prayed, that it would buffer the impact. That the fold would take the brunt of the explosion. That the children might live. But before she could even prepare for the pain of death, Cade roared. The sound wasn't like anything she had heard from the human before. It was raw and primal, full of power, echoing through the air with such force that it rippled the mists below. She stared, wide-eyed, at the source of the sound. And for the first time since meeting him, Esmeralda felt fear. The roar tore from Cade's throat before he even realized he was making a sound. One moment he had been on the edge of unity, so close to becoming one with the storm seed that he could taste it in his blood, and the next, the connection had been ripped from him. Something inside him screamed at the loss. The cycle had been perfect. The surge of power, the electric purity of the storm seed racing through him. It made him feel alive. No, not just alive, whole. For the first time since his encounter with the Ashen Emperor he hadn't felt broken. His body had thrummed with strength, with clarity. His every cell had drunk from the storm like it was divine ambrosia. As the last echoes of lightning faded, Cade became aware of subtle changes rippling through him. Like pieces of his body that hadn't quite fit together since the Ashen baptism were being nudged into place by the storm's passage. His muscles no longer trembled under the strain of his own weight. His breathing felt deeper, steadier, like his lungs could draw in air without struggle. His body wasn't healed. The aches were still there. The damage from the Ashen baptism hadn't vanished, but thanks to the storm seed something had shifted. And now it was gone. The last dredges of its power had been in his grasp and then they were unceremoniously torn away. He opened his eyes with a jolt. His body was still buzzing, still sizzling with the echo of the storm seed's power, but the source was absent. His hands clutched at empty air. His chest felt hollow, robbed of something vital. And there, crouched a meter away from him, was Esmeralda. His vision sharpened as his instincts surged to the surface. His lips curled back slightly, his breath ragged. Every part of him wanted to snarl at her, demand the return of what was his. The power. The storm. But then he met her eyes. Esmeralda's expression was taut with restraint. Her face was a strange mix of fury, disbelief, and something Cade couldn't immediately place. Shock? Confusion? Awe? The sight broke through whatever had seized him. His jaw clenched, and the tension in his body receded slightly as his conscious mind slammed back into control. What the hell had just happened? What had gotten into him? He looked down at his shaking hands. Then back up at Esmeralda. He started, but the words died in his throat. She didn't speak. She just stared at him, eyes locked onto his face like she was waiting for something. Cade swallowed hard and tempered his voice. Did I do something wrong? Esmeralda still said nothing. Then, at last, her posture shifted. Some of the tension bled out of her shoulders. Her eyes blinked, slow and deliberate. Stay here, she said softly. Almost hesitant. Do not move. She turned without a word and stepped away from him. Cade nodded quickly, unsure what else to do. Esmeralda walked to the edge of the pavilion. The young frogs were now clustered nearby, eyes wide, their croaks hushed and nervous. She raised her staff and slammed it once into the rigid pad below. The sound echoed across the lily walker. Lessons are done for today, she announced curtly. Return to your nests. They hesitated, still gawking, but one by one, the young ones began to hop away, their bodies low, like they feared what might happen next. Only when the last frogling vanished into the mist did Esmeralda turn back and return to where Cade was seated. She lowered herself onto the woven mat opposite Cade with a stiffness that hadn't been there before, her staff resting across her knees. For a moment neither of them spoke. Cade shifted, suddenly all too aware of the silence pressing in around them. Should I say something? Would that help? Or just make it worse? I don't even know what happened. It was like something deep inside of me erupted open and all that mattered was what was in that jar. I needed it like I'd been starving and only that lightning could make it stop. Before he could decide what to say, Esmeralda spoke. Her voice was low and restrained. Do you know what you just did? The question hit harder than he expected. Cade hesitated. His throat tightened from the memory of that raw hunger that had surged through him. He chose his words with care. I think I resonated with the storm seed. Esmeralda's eyes didn't flicker. She stared into him with a steady, unreadable gaze. The silence dragged. Cade swallowed and pushed forward, the weight of her stare refusing to let him stop. I thought I felt a buzzing from the jar, so I focused on it. Then I tried to find something similar within myself. After a while, I felt a matching kind of buzz, not identical, but close. So I tried to adjust the feeling inside me to sync with what I felt from the storm seed. It took time, but eventually I got them to align. The rhythm, the intensity, they matched. Still, Esmeralda said nothing. Her gaze locked onto his, unblinking. Cade looked down, unable to hold it. When I finally got them to match, he said more quietly, some kind of energy started pouring into me. It felt good. Better than good. Like my body was finally getting something it had been missing. He frowned, remembering the moment it faded. But then it left, and everything started aching again. He lifted his eyes to meet hers. I could feel the energy from the storm seed. It flowed into me, moved through me. Then it reversed like it was drawing energy back from me into the jar. I thought that was the resonance you talked about. So I let it continue, encouraged it. I tried to make the cycle go faster. Cade hesitated, the final thought still twisting in his chest. I really thought I was doing something right. He looked at her, voice low. So why did you stop me? Esmeralda studied him for a long time. Not his face alone, his posture, his breathing, the way his essence moved beneath his skin. Cade felt like an insect pinned under glass. Finally, she exhaled. I can tell, she said slowly, that you are not lying. Cade let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But what you described, she continued, should not be possible. His brow furrowed. What do you mean? The storm seed is not consumed upon reaching resonance, Esmeralda said. It is answered. Stormicallers shape storms. They do not drink them in, they do not cycle them through their bodies like blood or essence. Her fingers tightened around her staff. What you did was something else. She fell silent again, gaze distant now, as if turning over pieces that refused to fit. At the moment, she said at last, I do not understand what you are or how you did what you did. Her eyes refocused on him. That troubles me. Cade's stomach sank. She rose to her feet and gestured for him to do the same. This is beyond me. We will seek the wisdom of the second elder. Cade pushed himself upright. His body felt good, better than good. His limbs obeyed without protest. His back didn't scream and his legs didn't protest against holding up his own weight. His breath came easier. He was still thin, still just skin and bone, but the constant feeling like he was at the edge of collapse was gone. Energy lingered in him, subtle but present. They took a few steps before Esmeralda stopped. She turned and regarded him carefully. Bring me your shell. Cade's heart dropped. He hadn't brought it earlier when they'd visited the second elder for more translation mucus. Why would he need it now? A knot formed in his stomach as he reached for it. I really messed up, he thought. And as he followed Esmeralda out of the pavilion, shell in hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he'd done to the storm seed had changed far more than just himself. For the second time that day, Cade followed Esmeralda between the winding stalks of the village's walker lilies toward the second elders. The great pad was already lowered to the swampy ground below, its surface white and unmoving as other lilies shifted and gave it space. Cade clutched his shell against his side as he walked, its weight much lighter than he remembered. Every step forward reminded him that he had probably fucked up big time. The storm still echoed faintly in his limbs, a ghost of power threading through muscle and bone. He felt better than he had in days. Stronger. Steadier. But guilt gnawed at the edges of that clarity. He glanced at Esmeralda. She hadn't spoken since they'd left the training pad. Her jaw was tight. Her stride clipped. Cade decided not to break the silence. As they reached the broad lip of the second elder's lily, the air felt denser somehow. At the center of the pad stood the second elder, the massive golden toad, gleaming beneath the filtered daylight. In front of him stood Pearl, the orange frog who had brought Cade here. Today, she was different, more animated, her voice quick and low as she addressed the elder. Cade could barely hear what she was saying, urgency plain in her movements. I just don't think I'm ready, Pearl was saying before she cut herself off at the sound of approaching footsteps. Both she and second elder Verosk turned to see Cade and Esmeralda approaching. Pearl's expression shuddered instantly. She stood straighter, her hands folding behind her. The second elder's eyes narrowed. His voice boomed across the pad. Esmeralda. The mucus has not yet worn off. What more is required of me today? Esmeralda bowed slightly. Second elder Verosk, something has occurred. I seek your wisdom. The second elder's golden throat pulsed once. Is it urgent? Pearl made a motion to excuse herself, but the elder lifted a hand. You will stay, he said. If you are to embark on the trials soon, then you must learn what it means to be an elder. Pearl looked briefly confused, then nodded and stepped back. Esmeralda took a breath and turned slightly toward Cade before speaking. As you instructed this morning, I guided the human in storm calling. I gave him the storm seed and asked him to attempt resonance, as we do with our younglings. The elder nodded. Did he fail? No, she said quietly. He did not. Cade saw Verosk's wide mouth twitch into the beginnings of a smirk. Then what is the problem? Esmeralda hesitated, her gaze flicking between Cade and Verosk. It may be easier to show you. She turned toward Pearl. I may need your aid. Pearl cocked her head. Aid? For what? Esmeralda's expression darkened. Somehow, against all odds, the storm seed has been destabilized. Prepare yourself. Pearl scoffed. That's impossible. No one's ever. But Esmeralda was already moving. With a grim expression, she reached 2 fingers down her throat and drew out the cracked jar. The moment it came into view, the air changed. The lightning inside was barely more than a wisp, a pale thread of blue and white, flickering weakly in the fractured glass. Pearl's words died in her throat. The second elder's eyes widened. Pearl snatched the jar from Esmeralda's hand with uncharacteristic urgency. She stared at the crack running down the side, at the broken seal of an artifact that had withstood countless generations of use without fail. Then she turned to Cade. Her voice was a snarl. What did you do? Hold, the second elder's voice rumbled, firm and low like distant thunder. Do not be so hasty, Pearl. Pearl froze mid-step, still cradling the storm seed in both hands. Her breath steamed even in the warm, humid air, and the expression on her face flickered between outrage and confusion. She glanced down at the cracked relic, then up at the towering golden figure of second elder Verosk. We will not pass judgment without understanding, he said. Esmeralda stepped forward, her staff clicking softly against the pad's floor. With respect, elder, I believe I already understand enough. She threw a glance at Cade, sharp and full of restrained fury, nearly destroyed one of our most sacred heirlooms. He does not understand our ways. He shouldn't be allowed near such artifacts. Explain, Verosk said simply. Esmeralda exhaled through her nose, frustration clear in her stance. Still, she obeyed. I began instruction as you asked, she said. I explained the concept of resonance and had Okapipai demonstrate the practice with the storm seed. I even allowed him to observe the flow of essence, though I reminded him the artifact was not to be used directly. I placed the jar in his care only while I returned to instruct the froglets. I left him alone for no more than a few hours. She gestured to Cade, who stood silent, his shell held in one hand. When I returned, he had already begun to cycle the lightning through himself. I don't know how he shouldn't have been able to, but he was drawing from the storm seed like it was some kind of drink. The jar cracked as I watched. Esmeralda's tone shifted, tight with emotion. I was afraid he'd cause a detonation. There were children nearby. I did what I had to. I removed the artifact from his hands before it could explode. Pearl had been inspecting the cracked storm seed as Esmeralda explained. Now, she spoke. It's stable. Esmeralda blinked. What? Pearl turned the jar gently in her webbed hands. The fracture weakened the seal, but the internal bindings are holding. And it's healing. Slowly. The script is already beginning to reweave. Verosk's golden eyes gleamed as he leaned forward. And the contents? Nearly completely drained, Pearl said flatly. The lightning essence is almost entirely gone. A few threads remain, but the storm seed won't return to strength for many cycles. Verosk gave a slow nod. Then we are fortunate it was not at full capacity. Had the jar cracked then, it would have exploded, Pearl finished. Esmeralda's mouth fell open slightly, stunned. You're not angry. I am cautious, Verosk said, but no, not angry. We cannot know yet if this was a disaster or a revelation. Esmeralda straightened, her expression hardening. Well, I've had enough. I will not waste another moment teaching him. He is dangerous, elder. Reckless. He doesn't even understand our paths, let alone walk them. Cade's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, face flushed. I've had enough of you too. All eyes turned toward him. Cade exhaled and continued, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. You think I'm the problem? I asked questions. You ignored me. You demonstrated a technique once, gave me an artifact you yourself thought I couldn't use, and then walked off without another word. What did you expect would happen? Esmeralda bristled, but Cade didn't stop. I've been lost since the system came. No core, no real guidance, no clue what's happening half the time. You think I want to mess up your ancient relics? I didn't even know what I was doing. I don't know how to use mana or stamina or whatever the hell essence is. No one ever taught me. He clenched his fists. If I'm that much of a problem, I'll go. Just like I left the other group in the tutorial. I don't want to be a burden to anyone. Not even to frogs. The pad fell silent. Cade's words hung in the air. Then, second elder Verosk's eyes narrowed. No, he said quietly. You will not leave. Cade blinked. What? Verosk didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried a weight that silenced the tension vibrating across the lily pad. You will not leave. Not yet. Cade shook his head. You heard Esmeralda. I don't belong here. I've got no affinity for your paths, and I'm clearly making things worse just by being here. It may be, Verosk said slowly, that we are not the right teachers for you. That our traditions, our methods, are too distant from what you are. Cade scoffed. Yet. No kidding. Verosk ignored him. But even if we cannot guide you down a path, it does not mean there are no paths left for you to walk. Esmeralda's eyes narrowed. You're not seriously suggesting. I am not suggesting we give him the verdant breathstone, Verosk said, cutting her off. You are correct to be cautious. He has no life breather affinity, and the risks of further damage are too great. Then what? Pearl asked, her voice was quiet but nervous. No, the elder said again. I am sending you both into the Great Tree Trials. Pearl's pupil shrank. What? Esmeralda looked scandalized. She's not ready. And neither is he. She still has refinement to do. She's only just begun to integrate her essence properly. She will learn by doing, Verosk said, unmoved. And he will go with her. No, Pearl said, stepping forward, her voice sharper than Cade had ever heard it. He's not trained. He doesn't understand the paths. Taking him with me will only slow me down. It'll put us both at risk. The trials aren't a teaching tool, elder, they're dangerous. I know, said Verosk. And you will rise to meet those dangers. Elder Pearl began, but he raised a hand and her words halted. If you are to become more than a pathwalker, he said, if you are to guide others someday, you must first learn how to carry the unshaped. You have always walked clean paths, Pearl. Always moved forward with certainty and skill. But leadership is not just knowing where to go. It is learning how to carry those who do not. Pearl stood frozen. Her hands clenched around the storm seed. You think I can become an elder? I believed it before he arrived, Verosk said, gesturing toward Cade. You carry more potential than I have seen in any youngling. Your affinity with all three paths is beyond even my own. Pearl looked stunned. Even Esmeralda looked momentarily speechless. You never told me that, she said. It was not time, Verosk said simply. He turned his attention back to Cade. The future is more uncertain than ever now. Akelion's arrival in this realm changes everything. The knot that binds will fray. And when it does, we will need strength and unity within the tribe. Cade exhaled slowly. He'd thought he was done being surprised. Apparently not. And sending me into these trials helps with that, how? The Great Tree is wise, Verosk said. It sees what we do not. It reveals what we cannot. You may not belong to our paths, but you may find one there. Cade opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. That's nice and all, but Pearl doesn't want me tagging along. And I'm not exactly eager to be dead weight while she's off proving herself. If you leave alone, Verosk said, you will be dead by nightfall. Cade snorted. I've heard that before. Hell, I've thought that before. And yet here I am. Verosk studied him carefully. Yes. You survived. That much is undeniable. But surviving and thriving are not the same. The silence stretched between them for a moment. Then Cade rubbed the back of his neck. You really think some mystical talking tree is going to fix me? I think, Verosk said, that it may help you see you do not need to be fixed. Cade shifted uneasily, glancing between Pearl, Esmeralda, and the towering golden elder who continued to watch him with that unreadable calm. All right, he said slowly. Let's say I go along with this. You're telling me the Great Tree is going to do what exactly? Hand me a personalized path? Is this supposed to be comforting? Verosk chuckled, the sound deep and warm. The Great Tree does not give out pity prizes, human. It does not coddle. It reveals only to those willing to see. Cade folded his arms. Sure. Fine. Enlightenment via the Deku Tree. But even if I wanted that, how am I supposed to pass a bunch of magical trials designed for frogs who've spent their whole lives learning your paths? As Esmeralda pointed out many times, I don't have an affinity for any of them. I couldn't even figure out how to resonate with a jar without nearly blowing us all up. Verosk gestured toward Pearl. That is why you will not face the trials alone. Cade arched an eyebrow. And we're back to the part where I'm just a burden someone else has to carry. Pearl let out a sharp sigh. Finally. The first smart thing I've heard you say. Cade turned and gave her a deadpan look. Really? We're still doing this? Her only reply was a shrug and a flick of her eyes away, though the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth hinted at something less hostile than her words. Verosk's gaze flicked between them, eyes bright. You may surprise each other yet. Esmeralda groaned softly. Elder, with all due respect, I think you're being reckless. Perhaps, Verosk said. But I would rather take a risk on growth than guarantee stagnation. Pearl stepped forward again, her grip on the storm seed finally relaxing. You're serious, then? You really mean for me to leave now? I haven't finished aligning my essence. I haven't even passed the final breathstone attunement. Then you will finish your refinement during the journey, Verosk replied. A true pathwalker is never done refining. And the tree does not wait. The ashen front will soon come around. Pearl's jaw tightened. This wasn't how I imagined it would happen. Rarely is the future how we imagine it, Verosk said gently. But it still comes. Cade let out a breath. So just to be clear, you're sending me on this spiritual jungle road trip because I accidentally fried one of your heirlooms and now you think I need therapy from a giant tree. And you're sending her because she's apparently your secret ace and needs a group project to pass elder class. Pearl's eyes narrowed again, but this time there was no bite. Just resignation. Verosk's eyes twinkled. That is one way to put it. Cade rubbed at his face and groaned. You frogs are all insane. Not completely, Verosk said. But just enough. Pearl gave Cade a long, assessing look. Don't slow me down. I'll do my best to be only mildly useless, Cade muttered. Acceptable, Pearl replied. Verosk raised his staff and tapped it once against the lily pad. Then it is decided. Pearl will depart for the Great Tree Trials right away and Cade will accompany her. Esmeralda looked like she wanted to object again, but the firmness in Verosk's tone made it clear the conversation was over. Cade exhaled. A new journey. More questions. But at least there was a chance to find something resembling direction in this corrupted dungeon. He could work with that. Sage lay awake in the longhouse. It wasn't noise that kept him from sleeping. Camp persistence seemed to swallow sound, muting the swamp beyond its walls until even the insects felt distant. It was the stillness that unsettled him, the unnatural pause that hung over the palisade, as if the tutorial itself had been pushed back and held at bay. While everyone else found relief, Sage couldn't help but feel as if this entire place was designed for stagnation. He stared up at the longhouse rafters, listening to the slow rhythm of sleeping bodies and the occasional creak of wood. His thoughts circled the same question until it felt like an itch under his skin. Do I tell them? Kranti would look at him like he'd lost his mind, as if Sage were choosing pride over common sense. Nadine would try to talk him through it, soften the edges, remind him of Kyle and Amanda. Professor Sanders would ask for logical reasons to leave. Then he'd argue, politely and relentlessly, until Sage either stayed or admitted he was leaving for something he didn't have hard data to back up. All of them, the entire group he had fought with for the past week, would try to convince him to stay. He could already hear it. Rest. Recover. We can plan better. We can regroup. As if the system cared about comfort when it threw them into this tutorial. Sage exhaled through his nose and sat up, rubbing a hand across his face. The memory of the system notice lingered in his mind. The lords and other beasts were getting stronger while he was here hiding behind wooden walls. 2 of the 8 lords were already dead. What kind of monster of a person was able to defeat such strong creatures? Knowing that 2 had already been killed meant that the system didn't put monsters like the lords into the tutorial to be avoided. It put them here to be confronted. To be overcome. To separate the people willing to push from the people who wanted to hide behind walls and cling to old notions of safety. He swung his legs over the edge of the sleeping pallet and stood. Sage moved through the longhouse with careful steps, weaving between slumped bodies. He didn't look at Kranti's sleeping form. Didn't look at Nadine curled on her side with her hands tucked beneath her chin. Didn't glance at Professor Sanders scrunched up in the corner. If he looked, he might hesitate. And hesitation was how people died out here. Outside, the pre-dawn air was damp and cold enough to bite. Camp persistence sat in that grey hour before sunrise, when the swamp was nothing but silhouettes and mist. A few torches burned low along the walkway, their flames barely stirring. Guards stood watch in pairs, weapons in hand, posture relaxed, too relaxed. Sage's boots made soft sounds on the plank path and no one challenged him until he neared the front gate. Earl waited a few meters back from it as if he didn't want to be seen standing too close. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaven head catching a hint of moonlight, arms folded across his barrel-like chest. When he noticed Sage, he lifted one hand in a loose wave. "Took you long enough," Earl murmured as Sage approached. His tone was casual, but his eyes were alert. Sage stopped beside him. Had to make sure I was making the right decision. Earl's mouth twitched. My group tried to talk me out of it all night. He huffed a short laugh. They think going back out there would be like walking into a hurricane for fun. They're scared, Sage said. He kept his voice low. But a wall feels like protection until you realize it was a cage all along. Earl snorted. That's poetic. It's true. Earl leaned closer, voice dropping further. I told them to come with me. Every one of them. He scrunched his face like the memory irritated him. They just kept saying there's safety here. That we can't go back out and fight. It was like they felt that fighting was optional. Sage's gaze drifted to the gate heavy wood with guards half dozing behind the torchlight. A line in the dark that separated the comfort of this place from the real tutorial outside. Maybe it's for the best, he said. Let the people who want a quiet corner have it. Leave the pressure to the ones willing to grow under it. Earl's chuckle was soft but genuine. I like your attitude, man. They turned toward the gate together and then a voice spoke from behind them, close enough that Earl visibly flinched. Leaving already? Earl jerked, then recovered when he saw who it was. Jesus, Richard. Do you practice sneaking up on people? Richard stood a few steps back, hands folded behind his back, expression mild as ever. He looked as if he'd been awake for hours, but his clothes were crisp, his hair neat, calm still painted onto his face. Sage's instinctive unease returned the instant he saw the man. Richard's gaze moved from Earl to Sage. Are you both planning to leave Camp Persistence? Sage's shoulders tightened. Is that a problem? Earl answered before Richard could. Yeah. We're leaving. Making our own way. Sage held Richard's gaze, waiting for resistance. For an attempt to persuade them to stay. For a threat wrapped in polite words. Instead, Richard sighed quiet, almost weary. Of course you're free to leave. I don't keep people here against their will. Richard continued, I only needed to know so I can update the camp when people wake. And so you remember what you signed. He lifted a hand slightly, as if gesturing to something only he could see. The contract remains in effect for 48 hours after departure. No harm to members of Camp Persistence. Direct or indirect. That includes leading beasts back here to pound on our walls. Earl shrugged. Fine by me. I don't think I'll be coming back this way anyway. Richard nodded once. Then I wish you both the best of luck out in the tutorial. He turned his head toward the guards on duty. Open the gate. The two guards straightened immediately. The gate groaned as it swung inward. Sage stepped forward without hesitation. Behind them, Richard's voice followed, just loud enough to carry. I do wish you would have stayed, he said, not quite a plea, more like an observation. You're among the stronger members of the camp. Sage didn't look back and neither did Earl as they stepped through the gate together. The gate began to close behind them. The first light of sunrise smeared faintly across the horizon at their backs, turning the fog into a pale ribbon. Earl glanced sideways at Sage. Still sure? He nodded once. Too late to turn back now. Besides, we won't find any challenge inside those walls. The system dropped us into a survival tutorial for a reason, and it wasn't so we could hide like mice in a cage. Richard remained where he stood, hands folded behind his back, watching the two figures recede into the thinning mist. The rising sun bled faint orange through the swamp canopy, painting Earl and Sage in long shadows before the terrain swallowed them whole. He waited. Not because he expected them to turn back, but because he preferred to be certain. When they disappeared into the trees across the clearing, he exhaled softly and summoned his interface. Settlement Management Camp Persistence. He mentally selected their names among the list of every person that signed the contract at Camp Persistence. Earl Smith status, departed. Sage Mustafa status, departed. Richard tapped each designation in turn, marking them as having formally abandoned the settlement. The entries shifted color. Contractual grace period, 48 hours remaining. He closed the screen with a casual flick of his fingers. For a moment, the calm smile faded from his face. Relief replacing his usual mask. His persuasion skill had washed over nearly everyone who entered the camp. It wasn't overt, nothing so crude as mind control. It simply nudged. Softened edges. Encouraged receptiveness to his words, to his way of surviving this tutorial. Most people leaned into it without ever realizing their thoughts had been guided. But those two. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. His influence hadn't taken root within them. He could feel it when he spoke to them, like pushing against a brick wall rather than plunging through water. The effect had been there, faintly, but not enough to take hold. Why? He replayed the memory of their contract signatures in his mind. After signing, he had gained limited access to their information. Their classes and their skills were readily available to him. Neither of them possessed a class or profession that implied unusual willpower. Neither did they have a passive trait that would have interfered with his influence. So what was it? Personality? Prior conditioning? Maybe just a statistical anomaly? Curious. Sir. Richard turned smoothly. One of the perimeter guards approached, spear resting against his shoulder. Should we have someone follow them? The guard asked. Just in case they circle back. Or, cause trouble. Richard studied the trilene through the partially open gate for another quiet second. Yes. Discreetly. He clasped his hands in front of him now, posture relaxed once more. Have Anton shadow them at a distance. And I want regular updates on their whereabouts. The guard nodded. Yes, sir. And remind Anton, Richard added pleasantly, he is observing. Not engaging. The guard hesitated. Even if they get in over their heads. Richard's expression didn't change. Especially then. The guard swallowed and gave a sharp nod before hurrying off. Richard watched him go, then turned his gaze back toward the swamp. The calm, reassuring smile sliding back into place. Sage stepped over a tangle of exposed roots, boots sinking slightly into damp earth. Mist clung low to the ground, curling around cypress trunks and hanging moss. Behind him, Camp Persistence was already gone from sight. Earl walked a few paces ahead, axe resting across his broad shoulder. Sage watched him fight earlier that morning small skirmishes against rodents of unusual size and giant mosquitoes and had come to a simple conclusion. Leaving with Earl had been the right decision. The man fought like a beast even against the relatively easy encounters they faced so far. Not reckless exactly, but once combat began, something in Earl shifted. His posture lowered. His breathing deepened. He committed fully to the fight at hand. There was no hesitation in his swings, no second guessing of his footwork. When Earl chose a target, he pressed until it fell. Sage respected that. You ever slow down? Sage called as they pushed through a patch of reeds. Earl grinned over his shoulder. Not while I'm still breathing. Sage smirked faintly. A low growl rolled through the swamp ahead. Both men froze. The underbrush parted with a wet rustle, and something stepped into view. It was the size of a small horse, long and low to the ground. Thick, scaled hide stretched over a lupin frame. Its head was narrow and elongated like a crocodile's, lined with serrated teeth. Yellow eyes locked onto them with predatory focus. Sage used his identify to get more information on the creature before him. Swamp Mawstalker Level 14, a hybridized swamp predator combining lupin musculature with dense reptilian scale plating. Earl's grin widened. Finally something big to fight. The beast lunged without warning. Sage reacted first. He thrust his wand downward, pulling mana from his core and funneling it into the earth below. The ground beneath the stalker rippled and a jagged stone spike erupted upward, forcing the creature to twist mid-leap. It clipped the spike along its underbelly, scales splitting with a wet tear. It landed hard but kept moving. Earl met it head-on. He roared and brought his axe down in a brutal overhead swing. The blade slammed into the creature's shoulder, biting deep. The stalker snapped at him, jaws clamping onto the haft of his axe. Let go of my axe, he barked as he tried to yank it out of the creature's maw. Sage slammed his wand toward the ground again. Soil wrapped around the beast's hind legs and hardened instantly, compacting in a thick earthen grip that locked its lower body in place. The stalker tried to thrash, but Sage's magic had its legs locked in place. Instead, its tail whipped around and caught Earl in the ribs, sending him stumbling sideways. Sage flicked his wrist and poured more mana out from his core. 3 narrow stone lances burst upward from beneath the creature's torso. One skittered off of its scales, but the other 2 drove through softer hide between scales. The stalker howled in pain. Earl recovered and wrenched his axe free before savagely hacking into the beast's exposed ribs. The creature tore free from the earthen trap in a spray of dirt, lunging toward Sage now. Sage didn't retreat. He stomped and the ground beneath him surged upward in a thick, angled slab just as the beast closed the distance. The stalker crashed headfirst into the sudden wall of stone. Earl came from the side. With a roar, he swung his axe in a savage horizontal arc, the blade shearing through the creature's neck before biting deep into the stone wall. Bone cracked. Blood sprayed. The headless stalker collapsed in a heavy, twitching heap. For a second, only the sound of their breathing filled the air. Then the system's text flickered before Seish's eyes. You have defeated Swamp Maw Stalker level 14. Experience granted. The notification faded. Seish flexed his fingers, letting the lingering vibration of earth magic settle. Earl planted his axe in the mud and let out a laugh. Now that's more like it. He looked at Seish. Those earth spears? That's nasty work. Coming up from underneath like that. Didn't even see it coming. It works, Seish replied evenly. Earl clapped him once on the shoulder hard enough to jolt him slightly. Yeah, it does. After giving the corpse a quick once-over and finding nothing of value, they pressed onward. An hour passed. Then another. They cut down swamp boars. A scaled serpent the thickness of a tree trunk. A pair of territorial vine creatures that tried to drag Earl into a patch of stink mud. Each fight was efficient compared to working with his old group. It was like he and Earl were on a different level compared to everyone else. Earl wiped sweat from his shaved head as they paused near a fallen log. We've been at it all morning, he muttered. And I still haven't leveled. Neither have I, Seish admitted. But these were safe fights. Maybe we need something a bit more challenging. You mean we need to find something stronger, Earl said, leaning back against the log with his axe resting across his knees. I'm inclined to agree. Hell, I haven't even had to dip into my rage yet. Haven't touched a single class skill. These things barely count as a warm-up. He rolled one shoulder, testing it, and gave a faint smirk. Stronger's fine, but let's not get stupid. We're not taking on a lord. I know that, Seish replied. He scanned the swamp ahead, eyes narrowing. There has to be something between these beasts and a lord. Something that can actually test us. They moved deeper west. The swamp thickened. The air grew hotter, heavier. After another stretch of minor skirmishes barely worth remembering, Seish felt it first. Heat. A dry, oppressive warmth pushing back against the swamp's humidity. Ahead, the trees thinned into a scorched clearing. The mud had hardened into cracked earth. Steam rose in lazy spirals. And in the center of it, something moved. A long, sinuous body coiled across the blackened ground. Crimson scales gleamed like living embers. Faint tongues of flame flickered along its back and between its ribs with each breath. It lifted its head. Amber eyes fixed on them. Blaze Blood Salamander level 21, a dominant fire aspect predator that thrives in regions where its elemental heat can disrupt natural swamp ecosystems. Neither of them had seen anything like it before. Earl let out a low whistle. Well, he said quietly, tightening his grip on his axe. That's definitely stronger. The sun was falling fast behind the canopy, casting long ribbons of gold and crimson through the dense trees. Cade trudged after Pearl, the Walker Lily village already far behind them. In its place was the true untamed swamp. Gnarled trunks rose from the muck, their roots tangled together and drinking deep from the wet earth. Somewhere above, faint shapes stirred in the high branches. The last frog song faded behind them. So, Cade said, stepping over a puddle that smelled like rot and sulfur, what's the deal with the leeches? Pearl glanced over her shoulder, her orange skin dappled with the last rays of daylight. What deal? You guys are seemingly all pacifists, but when it comes to leeches they're kill on sight. She blinked. What does pacifist mean? Pacifist means you don't fight. Or at least, you don't kill unless you have to. Ah. Pearl nodded, looking forward again. Then yes. That is our way. We do not kill unless it is necessary for food or for the cycle. Cade frowned. But the leeches? They're the one exception. Pearl's tone grew more serious. The leeches are not of the cycle. Not truly. None of the songs passed down from before this realm was knotted mention them. They did not exist before our realm was cut from the rest. Cade stepped around a knotted vine. So what, you think they're unnatural? I think they're an aberration, Pearl said. They consume life and give nothing back. They take and take and take, then vanish underground with what they've stolen, their bodies too bloated to move on the surface, so they burrow. Essence is hoarded and never returned. Cade mulled that over. So they're basically parasites. Pearl tilted her head. They are a perversion. Blind in all but their gluttony to consume. Nothing more. He let the silence stretch for a few paces, then said, "Sounds a lot like the Ashen Emperor to me. Something that exists to destroy the life you are trying to cultivate." Pearl glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Ash tortoises are different. Complicated. Their destruction is not outside the cycle. It is part of it. That surprised Cade. How can destroying life be part of a life cycle? She spoke slowly, like quoting something learned long ago but didn't quite believe. Life without death spreads endlessly. It chokes itself. Twists into unnatural shapes. Without balance, it becomes monstrous. Cade nodded slowly. Back where I'm from we have something called cancer. It's a disease where parts of the body grow uncontrollably, consuming more and more of the body's resources. Eventually, they outcompete everything else. The body dies because of too much life in the wrong places. Pearl looked at him now, fully. A sickness of growth. Exactly. Growth is good. But growth without balance. He shook his head. That's bad news. He paused for a moment before continuing. So your cycle works by the frogs bringing life while the tortoises bring death? You balance each other. Pearl gave a thoughtful croak. Perhaps you are not as dense as I feared. Cade snorted. High praise. Pearl gave Cade a sideways glance, the corners of her mouth twitching upward. Not as dense, she clarified. You're still mostly dense. Gee, thanks, Cade muttered. But she was already turning back to the path, her eyes scanning the growing shadows ahead. The sun had nearly vanished now, and the canopy above was soaking up the last of the light. Pearl's voice grew quieter. Even if the ash tortoises are necessary, I don't like them. They destroy without care. Anything that crosses their path, be it frog, tree, beast, or insect, becomes fuel for their perverse path. Cade frowned. The second elder mentioned using that mucus of his to communicate with things that don't speak your language. Has he met the tortoises before? Pearl gave a sharp nod. He has, but only during rare gatherings between our two tribes. The grand elders of both frog and tortoise oversee them to ensure there is no essence exchanged, just words. Under their gaze, neither side dares to break the truce. But without them? Without the grand elders' protection? Pearl's expression darkened. To the tortoises, we'd be easier to harvest than glowmage larvae. Cade blinked. Wait. You're saying a tortoise would just eat you? Why not? She said simply. We are life incarnate. Pure, fertile essence, and, to them, we must look like divine fruit from the great tree herself. He grimaced. What about the reverse? Wouldn't that also mean the tortoises be valuable to you too? I mean, if they're so saturated with death essence or whatever, couldn't you use that somehow? Pearl shook her head. You still do not understand. Our paths are not mirrors. They do not directly feed one another. Life cannot grow from death, but death feeds well on life. If I killed a tortoise, at best I would gain nothing, and at worst I might break my path entirely. I'm starting to see why you hate those things, Cade muttered. Pearl grunted. Hate is a waste of essence. But I do not trust them, and neither should you. They walked on in silence for a time, their steps muffled by moss and mulch. The swamp forest around them deepened in color, the foliage shifting subtly as the moon began to rise. Its light filtered down in shafts of muted violet, painting the undergrowth in strange hues. Eventually, Pearl slowed. Sound travels far in the dark, she whispered. And things in this part of the swamp hear better than they see. We should not speak from here. Cade nodded, following her lead. They pressed forward, quietly now, slipping between twisted trees and over thick roots slick with moisture. Cade's breathing steadied, his thoughts drifting inward. It was the first real silence he'd had in days. And in that silence, he found questions. His stats had risen, he knew that. The system had logged his attributes, but despite the numbers going up, he didn't feel stronger or faster or smarter. He felt frayed. Like something had torn loose inside of him and no amount of power would patch it. Essence. The frogs kept talking about it. Moving it, weaving it, calling it to perform their form of magic. But what was it? Mana? Life force? Some combination of the two? No one had given him a straight answer. He still had his quest to eliminate the Lords of the Swamp and the dungeon quest to cleanse Cynthia's legacy, but he hadn't progressed them at all since being here. Lords of the Swamp was put on the back burner until he found a way to leave this insane corrupted dungeon. But cleansing Cynthia's legacy was something he could work on here, if only he had any clues as to what the corruption was. Everything was just so foreign to him, how was he supposed to know what was corruption versus what was supposed to be normal to this dungeon? Pearl moved ahead, silent and alert. Every few minutes she'd point out something, a vine pulsing with faint bioluminescence, a flower shaped like a spiked wheel, a beetle the size of Cade's fist with translucent wings. The deeper they went, the more alive the forest became. Leaves quivered at their passing. Spores drifted lazily from the undersides of mushrooms. It was beautiful, but at the same time it felt like it was too much as he watched everything competing for resources. Plants were bursting with growth and motion, overlaying and overlapping each other to get an edge as they grew and expanded for territory. It was impossible not to notice how everything here fought to exist. Every inch of space was claimed by something growing, slithering, or crawling. Vines coiled over branches, moss devoured stone, and strange fungi bloomed like wounds on the trunks of half-drowned trees. The swamp wasn't peaceful, it was a battleground, a riot of unchecked growth and constant struggle where life clawed tooth and nail for every scrap of space and sunlight. It felt ancient, indifferent, and brutal, as if the land itself had decided that survival was all that mattered and everything else was just noise. Cade was pulled from his thoughts by the butt of a spear tapping sharply against his ribs. He blinked and looked over. Pearl gave him a pointed look and gestured ahead. They stood at the edge of a wide, stagnant stretch of swamp water. It glistened in the moonlight, slick with film and pocked with floating debris. From where they stood to the opposite bank was 100 meters, maybe more. Halfway across, nestled like a stepping stone, was a single island no more than 5 meters wide, overgrown with weeping ferns and thorned brush. Beyond that was a wall of fog that swallowed the far shore. Pearl pointed to the far bank. Then at the island. Then she made a series of quick hand signals. Cade didn't know the formal meaning, but he got the gist. Stay alert. Move quietly. Be ready. She pointed next with the tip of her spear to something hanging from a low branch, just above the water. Cade squinted through the dark. It looked like a swollen, tapered leathery pouch half a meter long, hanging vertically like a fleshy fruit. In the dark, it was hard to make out the details. Its surface glistened faintly like it was moist with dew. Cade stared at it for a moment longer, then nodded silently even though he was unsure of what she wanted from him. Together, they stepped into the water almost immediately sinking down past their knees. It was warmer than he expected, and thick with the scent of algae and decay. Each movement created ripples that lapped at his thighs and stirred up sediment from below. They moved slowly, carefully, each step deliberate. They had made it perhaps a quarter of the way when Cade heard a faint splash behind them. Then another and another. As if something was slipping into the water. He glanced back and his eyes flicked to where the dangling object had been, but the mist and darkness obscured his vision. Pearl shot him a glance and subtly increased her pace. Cade followed suit, trying to move quickly without splashing too much. Then he heard another splash, this one much closer than before. He whipped his head around, searching the water for any signs of movement, but he saw none. Out of the corner of his eye he caught the blur of Pearl's spear. In one fluid motion she spun and thrust straight between Cade's legs. He yelped and jumped backwards, not expecting the sudden sneak attack from the frog. But instead of impaling him, there was a wet crunch, and a burst of red-black fluid sprayed upward. Pearl drew her spear back. Impaled on the tip was a swollen, tapered creature. The same size and shape Cade had seen hanging from the branch. Up close, it was far more disgusting, a deep crimson leech, bloated and pulsing, its slick body writhing as it slowly died on her weapon. Corrupted juvenile swamp leech level 8. An immature but highly adaptable predator twisted by unknown corruption. While not yet fully developed, it displays relentless pursuit behavior and an early taste for warm-blooded prey. She didn't say a word. Cade gave her a silent nod, his pulse still hammering. She pulled the leech free and dropped its corpse into the water. It floated for a moment before slowly sinking. She swirled the tip of her spear in the water, cleaning the ichor off. They moved again, faster now. Another splash to their right. Then to the left. Pearl's spear flicked out, lightning quick, and another leech was skewered. Then another. She moved with terrifying precision. Not 1 ounce of hesitation in her lithe frame. Her eyes were wide and alert, scanning the water for the next threat. Cade tried to help, but the things were hard to spot until they were right on top of them. He held his tortoise shell tight, using it to swat at ripples and knock away whatever came too close. Something heavy slammed into the shell with a wet thud, the impact jolting up his arms. The leech slapped against the curved surface, its slick body smearing mucus across the ash-scorched scuds before it slid off and vanished back into the water. Pearl didn't slow. Her spear flashed again and again, the shaft barely visible as it darted through the air. Each strike was precise as she cleanly punctured leeches mid-lunge or skewered them just below the surface. She pivoted around Cade instinctively, positioning herself so her weapon covered him as well. They were a little more than halfway across when the water around them began to churn. The ripples multiplied. Splashes erupted from every direction. Shapes too numerous to count moved beneath the surface. Pearl clicked her tongue sharply. "Run," she hissed. "Get to the island. Now." She didn't wait for confirmation. She surged forward, water exploding around her legs. Cade followed, heart hammering as his bare feet churned through the muck. The silence was gone now, replaced by frantic splashing and the sickening slap of bodies hitting water. Leeches hurled themselves toward them. Cade brought the shell up again and again, batting creatures out of the air as they launched from the water like homing missiles. Some bounced off the shield and fell back with wet smacks. Others hit the edge and tumbled past him, writhing and furious. Pearl's spear was everywhere. She thrust, pulled, and spun, the blade punching through flesh with ease. She used the butt of the weapon too, cracking it against lunging bodies and shoving them back into the water before they could latch on. They reached the island in a spray of water and mud. Pearl vaulted up first, whirling the moment her feet hit solid ground. Cade scrambled after her, slipping once before hauling himself up with a grunt. The leeches came with them. They poured onto the island in a writhing mass, skinny ones like ropes, fat squat ones that bounced when they landed, and others so bloated they looked ready to burst. Their colors ranged from dull red to deep crimson, almost violet in the moonlight. Pearl moved like a storm given form. Her spear punched through one, then another. She yanked it free and spun, impaling two more in a single thrust. Despite the carnage, her face was tight with disgust. "I hate this," she snapped as she tore her weapon free. "Killing this filth." Another leech lunged and Cade reacted without thinking. He grabbed it with his bare hand. The thing was warm and slick, its body flexing violently in his grip. He gagged as it tried to twist around his wrist, its mouth puckering wide. He slammed it down against the ground and brought the rim of his shell down on top of it. It burst under the pressure. Ichor splattered across his arms and chest, thick, coppery-smelling sludge that steamed faintly. "You have defeated Corrupted Swamp Leech Level 4. Experience granted. Cleanse Cynthia's Legacy Quest progress. Corruption cleansed, 1/. Cade stared, breath hitching. The system still worked. It felt like it had been so long since he's received an experience notification, and relief washed through him. He hadn't even realized how badly he'd needed that confirmation until it appeared. "Cade!" Pearl snapped. He looked up just in time to raise the shell as two more leeches launched at him. He swatted one aside and crushed the other underfoot, toes squishing the leech into gore. They fought like that for what felt like hours, though in reality it couldn't have been more than a few brutal minutes. Pearl carving paths through flesh, Cade blocking, bashing, and crushing anything that got too close. The leeches came in waves, hurling themselves onto the island without hesitation, only to die in heaps. Finally, the rush slowed to a stop and the water stilled. Cade leaned heavily on his shell, chest heaving. His arms trembled, slick with leech gore. Pearl stood nearby, spear planted in the ground, shoulders rising and falling as she drew in slow breaths. Even she looked strained from fighting off so many. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of water dripping and their breathing. He chose to ignore the notifications from the system and instead focus on catching his breath. Then a massive splash erupted from the bank they'd come from. Cade's head snapped up. Something enormous was moving through the swamp. The water parted around a thick, writhing shape. Easily 10 meters long and 1.5 meters wide. A colossal leech surged forward, its body pulsing as it dragged itself through the water with terrifying ease. Pearl's eyes went wide. "No," her breath hitched. "That one is too big." Cade remembered her words from earlier. "We stand no chance against the larger ones. You can only run and hope it doesn't decide to follow." He turned toward her and found she was already moving. Pearl was off of the island in a blur, charging straight toward the misted bank. Water exploded around her as she ran. Cade didn't hesitate any further. He leapt after her, bare feet splashing hard as he sprinted through the swamp, shell clutched tight against his side. Behind them, the water roared as the massive leech surged forward, closing the distance with horrifying speed. Cade ran as water churned around his legs. He pushed through the swamp, each stride a fight against the sucking pull of the muck below. Pearl was far ahead of him, her lean frame cutting through like a spear. She moved with effortless precision, barely disturbing the water as she sprinted toward the distant shore. Cade, on the other hand, was floundering. His legs burned. The shield in his arms weighed him down, and every splash he made might as well have been a siren giving away his location. The island faded behind him, but the giant leech hadn't stopped. Behind him, the sound of the displacing water grew louder by the second as the massive leech surged closer. Cade's breath hitched as he risked a glance backward. Through the faint violet light, he saw it undulating forward like a freight train of flesh. Ahead, Pearl reached the bank and didn't stop. Without hesitation she disappeared into the dense mist. Cade cursed and pushed harder, splashing the last few meters to shore. He hit solid ground and nearly tripped over his own 2 feet. The mossy earth was slick, but he quickly found his footing and forced himself forward. The monstrous sound behind him was too close to stop and assess where Pearl had gone. His legs screamed. His lungs ached. His body had been broken down in the ashen wastes, baptized in ash and pain until it was stripped bare. What little strength he'd gained since then felt like it was being used up. He couldn't run much longer, but if he stopped he'd be devoured by the leech not too far behind. With no other option, Cade threw himself into the wall of mist. The world turned white and grey, his visibility shrinking to less than a meter. The trees vanished. The path vanished. He couldn't even see the ground, but he kept running. Behind him, the leech surged onward. Somehow still following him, and from the sounds of it, it was getting closer by the second. Cade clenched his teeth and ran harder. The ground tilted downward beneath his feet. He stumbled, nearly fell, but caught himself and let the slope carry him forward. The mist thinned slightly as he descended, and after a few more frantic strides, he broke into a clearing. Moonlight spilled into the space, casting soft violet hues over a strange sight. A wall 15 meters high, made not of stone or wood, but of tangled mangrove roots fused into a seamless lattice. The structure stretched left and right beyond what Cade could see, impenetrable and unnaturally smooth. 3 dark arches leading into the wall lay in front of him. Pearl was nowhere in sight. Cade faltered for half a second, uncertainty digging its claws into him. Had she come this way? Had he veered off? There was no time to decide. The unmistakable squelching of flesh behind him was growing louder. The giant leech was nearly upon him. Cade tightened his grip on the shell and made for the center archway. The moment he crossed beneath the arch, a shiver crawled down his spine. It wasn't the cool air or the fear of being devoured. It was the unmistakable sensation of being watched. As if something old had turned its attention toward him the instant he crossed some invisible barrier. Despite the feeling, he didn't slow. The passage beyond the arch ran in an unsettlingly straight line. Root walls towered on either side, their surfaces merged into a continuous corridor that extended far ahead. They rose at least 15 meters high, their bark pressed so tightly together it looked almost carved rather than grown, catching and diffusing the faint violet glow drifting through the mist. There were no ledges, gaps, or protrusions, nothing he could use to climb beyond the range of the leech barreling toward him. The corridor was wide enough that Cade didn't feel cramped, but that only made it worse. There was nowhere to hide. Nowhere to break the line of pursuit. Mist pooled here too, but thinner than outside. He could see about 5 meters ahead, maybe the same behind him, while everything else dissolved into hazy nothingness. His footfalls were muffled by moss that clung stubbornly to the ground, damp and springy beneath his toes. And still the leech followed. Cade could hear it more clearly than ever. The wet, dragging undulation of massive flesh. The internal gurgle of some poor creature being digested. "How are you still following me?" he muttered between breaths. He didn't dare look back. Was it luck? Had it simply barreled through the arch without thinking? Or was it tracking him somehow, actively pursuing him like a predator latched onto the scent of its prey? The corridor ended abruptly in a T-junction. Left or right? Both passages vanished into mist at sharp right angles. A quick glance and he saw no footprints. No sign that Pearl had passed through either direction. The sound behind him grew louder. Cade didn't have time to think, so he turned left and ran. The new corridor curved slightly, just enough to break the straight-line view. His lungs burned as he forced himself onward, mind racing even as his body screamed. Think. Think. Pearl had said the leeches were blind. If that was true, then sight wasn't how it was tracking him. Sound? Maybe, but he was running on moss, not stone, and the leech was making far more noise than he was. Heat? Cade dismissed that quickly. The mist was cool and clung to everything. Any warmth he gave off would disperse almost instantly. So what was left? The answer struck him like a slap in the face. He had been breathing heavily ever since their battle with the leech swarm on the island. He had been gulping down air as he ran for his life. The giant leech must be following his breath. That had to be it. Back on Earth, mosquitoes could track humans by the carbon dioxide they exhaled. A chemical trail invisible to humans but unmistakable to the mosquito. If these leeches had something similar, some sense that was tuned to breath rather than blood, then he was just leading it right to him with every exhale. He was panting. Gasping. Every desperate breath was another point on an easily traceable trail. He sucked in air sharply and forced himself to slow his breathing, even as his legs kept moving. It hurt. His body protested immediately, demanding oxygen, demanding relief. But the idea of leading that thing straight to him with every exhale terrified him more. But if it was following his breath, then maybe, just maybe, he could mislead it. The corridor stretched on ahead, mist swirling lazily at knee-height as Cade ran, already shaping a plan even as the monstrous sound behind him refused to fade. Cade ran on, forcing his breathing into something tighter and more controlled despite the burn in his chest. The corridor curved gently now, not enough to break pursuit entirely, but enough that the sound of the leech seemed to dull a fraction. His lungs screamed for air. His legs trembled with every step. Still, he pushed forward until the corridor opened again. Another junction. But this one was different. The mist here was thinner, stretched and wispy, allowing him to see farther 10 meters down each path. To the right, the corridor was smooth and uniform, the moss undisturbed, the root walls flawless and uninterrupted. To the left, the ground was uneven. Pock marks scarred the moss, shallow depressions dotting the floor, and narrow divots ran along the base of the wall as if something had attempted to claw or burrow its way through. Cade skidded to a stop even as the sound behind him surged closer. His mind raced, gears clicking into place as panic sharpened into hyperfocus. An idea formed, reckless and desperate, but better than running until he collapsed. Cade sucked in a deep breath, then another, and another. He pivoted and sprinted down the right-hand corridor, deliberately making himself hyperventilate as he ran. His chest heaved as he forced more air through his lungs than they wanted to give. 4 meters in, he expelled everything in one sharp breath and then inhaled as deeply as he could and held it. The world narrowed instantly. Pressure bloomed behind his eyes. His heart thundered as he spun and raced back the way he'd come. He dove into the left corridor. The sound of the leech was terrifyingly close now. Cade risked a glance back and caught sight of it through the mist, a massive, undulating bulk filling the corridor, its slick body rippling as it surged forward. Cade spotted a deeper divot ahead, wider than the others, carved into the seam between wall and ground. He lunged for it, lungs already burning as his body screamed for air. He threw himself sideways and jammed into the hollow, scraping skin and shoulder as he twisted his body to fit. It was barely large enough. He shoved the tortoise shell after him, wedging it between the ground and the wall to form a crude barrier. What little light had been present from the violet moon was now blocked as darkness closed in on him. His lungs were on fire, but he clamped down on the urge to breathe. Every muscle in his chest spasmed as the seconds stretched into agony. His vision dimmed at the edges, but he forced himself to focus on just one thing, listening. He heard the leech reach the junction. He heard it stop. A wet, searching stillness followed. Cade froze, every nerve screaming as his body trembled with the effort of holding his breath. He could hear the internal churn of the creature, the slosh of stolen life within its bloated form. Then he heard the unmistakable sounds of movement as the leech surged away from him. It followed the right-hand corridor, chasing the heavy trail of breath Cade had left behind. Cade squeezed his eyes shut and held on, counting heartbeats that threatened to tear themselves out of his chest. With each beat the sound grew more distant and eventually faded into an eerie quiet. He remained pressed into the divot. His lungs were screaming and fear hammered through him. But it wasn't until he was certain the monster had taken the bait that he allowed himself to breathe again. He waited until his vision blurred and the pressure in his chest became unbearable. When he finally let the air out, he did so in a slow, trembling stream, careful not to let it rush free. He pressed his face down into the damp soil and moss, breathing shallowly into the earth itself, hoping the ground would swallow the sound and scent of his breath. The ache in his lungs dulled to a manageable throb. His heartbeat gradually slowed from a panicked hammering to steady throb. Only when he was sure the leech wouldn't come back around did he dare to shift from his position. Carefully, he nudged the shell away from the opening and peered out. Mist clung to the corridor in lazy curls. The root walls stood silent and indifferent. He detected no movement, no signs the giant leech was back on his trail. Cade eased himself out of the divot. His joints felt stiffer than ever and his muscles trembled from the strain. He moved slowly now, each step deliberate, keeping his breathing shallow as he continued down the pockmarked path away from where the leech had gone. Corridor after corridor stretched ahead, splitting and bending in ways that defied intuition. Every intersection offered the same choice, left or right, with no markings, no clues, and no sense of progress. Cade relied on instinct alone, and more often than not it tugged him leftward. He followed it, not because he trusted it necessarily, but because he had nothing else to go by. As the panic from being chased by the giant leech had receded, a sense of unease took its place. The longer he walked, the more wrong this place felt. The walls were too smooth. Too consistent. Mangrove roots should twist and knot, should bear scars of age and struggle, but these were fused together with unnatural precision, polished to a sheen that reflected the moonlight. It felt like this place had to be constructed for some purpose that Cade could only guess. Was this part of the Great Tree Trials? Pearl hadn't said much, but what she had shared now echoed in his mind. Once each cycle, frogs were sent to the Great Tree to participate in trials meant to test them. To prepare them to better fulfill their role in the cycle of this realm. Cade slowed as realization crept in. This mist. These corridors. The forks in the path. Was this part of it? Was this a trial meant to be navigated by frogs following the path of mist weaving? But how would a mist weaver pass this? The maze wasn't dangerous in the conventional sense. He hadn't seen any traps, there were no immediate threats, but it was disorienting. Without sight lines or markers, he could see it trapping someone indefinitely. Unless you could shape the mist. Use it to guide your path through the maze. Cade exhaled softly. He didn't have that ability. All he could do was keep moving forward. Time began to lose meaning as he walked. He couldn't tell how long he'd been wandering, minutes or hours, only that fatigue crept back into his limbs. The strength from the storm seed had long since faded. Eventually, he reached another intersection, but this one was different than the rest. 3 paths branched forward instead of 2, each swallowed by thick mist. Cade stopped at the junction and waited for his gut to tell him which way to go. It didn't. No pull or warning. No sense of right or wrong. For the first time since entering the maze, Cade felt truly lost. He shifted his weight, glancing down each corridor in turn. They all had the same identical walls with identical fog. He was about to choose at random when he heard a familiar voice call out his name. Cade. His blood turned to ice. The voice was soft. Familiar. So achingly familiar it hurt. Cade, it whispered again, drifting from the left-hand passage. It's me. His breath caught in his chest. He knew that voice. Had known it his whole life. Long before the system came and upended everything. Kaylee, he whispered, the name slipping out before he could stop himself. His sister's voice answered, warm and gentle. I've been looking everywhere for you. Come on. Hurry. I'm right here. Cade's heart slammed against his ribs. No, that was impossible. She shouldn't be here. She couldn't be here. He was the only human inside of this dungeon. His feet shifted toward the left corridor without him telling them to. The mist ahead curled invitingly, and his sister's voice called to him once more, closer now. Please, Kaylee said softly. We just want to help you. Cade stepped forward, his body moving on its own. He was drawn by the voice of a sibling he hadn't seen since before the world turned upside down. Cade, Kaylee called again, just beyond the mist-filled left corridor. Her voice was soft, hopeful, and coaxing. The way she used to sound when they were kids and she wanted him to help her catch lizards in the backyard. He took another step, his breath catching. We're here, she whispered. You're not alone anymore. Then another voice joined hers. Cade. It was Cassandra now. Her voice, like the rest of her, was nearly identical to Kaylee's, but Cade could easily tell the difference between the two. Come on. It's safe. We've been looking for you. He stopped at the threshold. The mist curled around his legs like it was reaching for him, beckoning him to step just a little farther. Then came a third voice. This one was rougher, deeper, the unmistakable baritone of his father. Cade, he called out, firm but calm. You're almost there. Just a few more steps and you'll be out of here. Not just of the maze but out of this whole damned dungeon. We've come to help. Cade's chest tightened. His foot hovered at the edge. He couldn't see through the mist but he could hear them so clearly, like they were just a step away. You don't belong here, Cassandra said, almost pleading. We miss you, Kaylee added. We're proud of you, his father said. I'm proud of you, son. I'm proud of everything you've gone through, everything you've had to do to survive since the world turned to shit. Cade blinked. Wait. What had his father just said? I'm proud of you, the voice repeated. Getting this far on your own, it must have been so hard. Cade froze. No. That wasn't right. His dad had never said that to him. Not when Cade got into the same college as his sisters. Not when he graduated with honors. Not when he earned his doctorate. Not once. Cade had spent most of his life chasing scraps of approval. Doing everything he could to impress the man who lavished praise on his daughters and offered Cade only critique. To hear that now, here, in a mist-filled death maze? It was like a bucket of ice water splashed over his head. His gaze sharpened and his focus returned. The mist was thicker here. It licked at his ankles, reached for his waist. And without realizing it, Cade had almost stepped fully into the corridor. His foot hovered just over the threshold. He stumbled back a pace, breath coming hard and uneven. The voices faltered. We're here for you, Cade, Kaylee said again, but it was weaker now, further away. You don't have to be alone, Cassandra whispered, fading. Come home, son, his father growled, the warmth gone from his voice now, revealing a hollow echo beneath. Cade backed away fast, shaking his head. No. No, that's not real. Whatever this maze was, whatever these trials were, he wouldn't put it past the system to try and manipulate him. It had tried worse before, like coercing him into killing a hatchling. It wasn't beyond weaponizing the people he'd lost to fit whatever weird agenda it had. He turned toward the right-hand corridor and took a step closer. And from its depths, something screamed. A low-pitched, blood-curdling scream. Cade flinched because he again recognized this voice, but this time the voice wasn't from a member of his family. It was Pearl. And she was screaming his name. Pearl's voice rang out again, croaking through pain and panic. Cade. Help me. Her voice was unmistakable. Low with that distinctive froggy rasp. It was the same voice that scolded him for being dense, the same voice that barked orders at him. But now it was raw with desperation. Another scream echoed through the corridor. He winced. It was closer this time. Wet sounds of flesh rending followed by heavy squelching and thrashing. Cade stepped forward, toward the right-hand path. He could understand her. Not just hear her voice, but actually comprehend the meaning behind her croaks and guttural sounds. That wasn't normal. She wasn't speaking in English, he knew that. But something in him translated her instinctively. Why? Certainly the second elder's translation mucus had to have worn off by now. Cade. Pearl's voice cracked. It's too strong, I can't please. More thrashing followed by something heavy slamming against the root walls. His feet carried him to the very edge of the right passage, the mist curling around his ankles like the other path, but this time it wasn't gentle. It clung to him like fingers grasping for life. He strained to see something, anything, but the mist remained thick and opaque, giving no hint of what lay ahead. Help me, Pearl whimpered. Cade's grip on his tortoise shell tightened as doubt surged through his mind. Would she really call out for him? She barely trusted him in the first place. She'd made it clear he was a burden, an outsider. He was someone she tolerated only because of her people's traditions, or maybe out of obligation to her path or the cycle she kept mentioning. She'd never called for him before. Not during the leech fight. Not when they were nearly overwhelmed. Why now? And how would she even know he was here? He hadn't made any noise. He hadn't called her name. The mist made it nearly impossible to see a foot in front of you, let alone spot someone across a junction. Another cry for help came, even more strained than the last, but Cade's breath was steady now. He didn't flinch. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. First his sisters and father. Now Pearl. Something was using familiarity to draw him in when he was at his weakest, at his most uncertain. The left-hand path had preyed on his longing for home and family. This one? It preyed on his guilt. On his fear of failing someone again. No, he muttered, stepping back from the edge. The mist curled hungrily, as if reluctant to let him go. "I don't believe you," Cade said. The voice screamed again, but it changed as it echoed. The tone warped mid-cry, turning sharp, almost mocking, before fading to nothing. Cade turned to the center path, the only one left. No voices came from this one. Just silence. He stepped forward cautiously. As if sensing his choice, the mist began to thin. It peeled away from the center corridor in wisps, revealing a narrow, 2-meter-wide path that stretched ahead. The air was still. The moss undisturbed. The walls were as unnaturally smooth as ever. Then, farther down the corridor, he spotted movement. Cade narrowed his eyes. A shape emerged from the mist, large and low to the ground, undulating in a slow but relentless rhythm. The sun crested above the high root walls behind him. Light spilled across the corridor and illuminated the figure ahead. Cade's heart dropped into his stomach. The giant swamp leech. Somehow, impossibly, it was here. Ahead of him. Already waiting for him. Its bloated form pulsed in the early morning light. It was slick with slime and inched forward with single-minded purpose. "Nope," Cade whispered. "Fuck that and fuck all three of these paths." He spun on his heel and ran, bare feet pounding across moss-slick ground as he sprinted away from the center corridor and the monster waiting within it. The image of the giant swamp leech seared itself into his mind. Its round mouth pulsing open and closed like some horrible flower, eager to drink him dry. That thing should have been behind him. It should have still been lost in the mist, tricked by the trail he'd left behind. So how had it gotten ahead of him? He didn't have time to figure it out. The only thing that mattered was not dying. He bolted back the way he had come, retracing his steps toward the previous intersection. Maybe there was another way. Maybe if he could get back to that last T-junction, he could double back and find a different path around. Behind him, he heard the sound. The wet scraping of slime against the root wall. The heavy, dragging slap of the massive leech pursuing him. Seriously? Cade gasped as he ran. He wasn't even sure his plan earlier had worked now. Had the leech followed him the whole time? Had it circled around somehow and tracked him during the night? Or had the voices in the mist led it right to him? The corridor ahead offered no divots. No places to hide. Just a long, narrow stretch of roots and moss. Cade forced his aching legs to move faster. His whole body protested. His lungs burned. But he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. The mist was thickening again. It curled around him in choking waves, blinding him until he could barely see his hands pumping beside him. The sound of the leech grew louder with each step. The sloshing, slick undulations echoing off the root walls, reverberating in his chest like a second heartbeat. Cade's thoughts narrowed to a single goal. Find the next intersection. It had to be close. He remembered it wasn't far, maybe another 100 meters. He just had to hold out. He just had to keep running. But the mist felt like a living thing now. It clung to his limbs and dragged against his skin. He felt as if he was running through syrup. The root walls, once wide enough to give him space to maneuver, now felt like they were narrowing with each step. They loomed in on either side, pressing closer, as if the maze itself was conspiring to trap him. Behind him, the sounds of the leech's pursuit rattled louder. Its massive body scraped along both walls now too big for the corridor, too wide to fit cleanly through. Suddenly he burst through the mist and stumbled into a vast clearing. Cade skidded to a halt, eyes wide. He'd reached the edge of something else entirely. The root walls opened up in a perfect circle at least 200 meters across, maybe more. Mist clung to the entrances scattered along the perimeter, but none of it entered the clearing. It was held back as if by some invisible force. Cade sucked in a breath, chest heaving. He'd made it. Then he heard it. A tremendous scraping behind him as the leech left the narrow corridor behind and broke through the mist barrier. He didn't wait around any longer and ran down the gentle slope of the clearing, the moss beneath his feet growing thinner, the ground more solid. And at the center of it all, rising like a colossus, stood a massive tree. It had to be the great tree Pearl had talked about. Its massive trunk soared upward like a natural spire, supported by 8 enormous root pillars that curved down and out in every direction. Beneath the tree, where the roots arced, a natural dome formed a cavernous space ringed in shadow directly beneath the trunk. Cade ran toward it like his life depended on it. The slope carried him downward toward the great tree's roots. His legs burned with every stride, but adrenaline kept him moving. The massive root pillars loomed closer. There had to be somewhere to hide. Behind him, the swamp leech was now fully in the clearing. Cade risked a glance over his shoulder and immediately regretted it. The creature was enormous in the open, somehow even bigger than when it had chased him before. Its slick body rippled as it surged downhill, mud spraying outward as it barreled toward him with terrifying speed. This was no illusion. No trick of the mist. The horrifyingly large leech was very real and it was coming right for him. Shit 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 shit, Cade hissed, lungs screaming. He veered toward the nearest root pillar and sprinted beneath the great tree's canopy. The air changed the instant he crossed the threshold. The soft moss gave way to damp, loamy soil. A strange pressure brushed against his skin, like static before a storm. His breath caught as the sensation crawled over him. Every hair on his arm stood on end, and his scalp prickled sharply. A crackle echoed overhead. Cade looked up. Hanging from the exact center of the dome beneath the great tree was a massive stalactite, its surface charred black as if lit on fire countless times. Veins of pulsing purple light ran through it, brightening with each passing heartbeat. Directly beneath it, nestled in the earth at the center of the dome, was a pool of still water smooth as glass. The reflection of the glowing stalactite shimmered faintly in the water's mirror-like surface, pulsing in rhythm with the light above. Hunger slammed into him. Not the dull ache of an empty stomach, but a hunger at the cellular level. Every part of him strained toward that light. His mouth watered. His hands trembled. The sensation was unmistakable. Lightning was in the air. The same electric tension he'd felt during the storm before Pearl found him. The same crackling presence he'd felt holding the storm seed. Power. Raw, barely contained power. His gaze locked onto the stalactite, drawn helplessly upward. At its base, where the light pooled brightest, he thought he saw a flicker in the shadow. Another crack split the air and Cade tore his eyes away. Not now. The swamp leech was almost on him. He could hear it clearly now, the slop of its bulk sliding over earth, the wet suction of its body pulling itself forward. He didn't have time to wonder what hung above him or why his body ached to consume it. He had to survive. Cade dove sideways, throwing himself behind one of the massive root pillars. He curled instinctively, slamming his tortoise-shell shield over his body just as the air detonated with sound. Crack! Purple-white light flooded his vision and a creature just around the root pillar screamed. The bolt slammed down from the charred stalactite and struck the pond beneath. Water exploded upward in a violent plume, part of it vaporizing instantly into hissing steam while the rest was hurled outward in a crashing ring. Droplets sprayed across the basin beneath the great tree, splashing against the ground where Cade lay curled beneath his tortoise shell. The water did not soak in. Instead, it rolled and slid across the earth as if repelled, flowing back toward the center in thin rivulets until it rejoined the pond. Within seconds, the surface was smooth again. Cade waited. His heart hammered so loudly he was sure that if the leech could hear, it would instantly know his location. Slowly, carefully, he shifted his head just enough to peer out from beneath the rim of the shell. The giant leech was no longer moving towards him. It had stopped dead in its tracks, its enormous body coiled and tense. The circular mouth at the front of its bulk had turned away from where Cade hid and now faced the stalactite above the pond. Rings of small, serrated teeth flexed and opened, tasting the air. Cade frowned. Was it afraid? The air was sharp with ozone, the acrid scent lingering from the lightning strike. Cade wondered if the smell interfered with whatever sense the creature used to track him. If it followed breath, followed the invisible trail of carbon dioxide he exhaled, then maybe the lightning had masked his presence. He didn't dare test the theory. He stayed still beneath the shell, muscles trembling, lungs burning. He held his breath again despite the ache clawing at his chest. The last thing he wanted was to announce himself now. Above, the veins within the stalactite began to glow once more. Purple light pulsed through the blackened stalactite in a slow, ominous rhythm. Each beat sent a shiver through the air beneath the tree. Static crawled over Cade's skin, raising goosebumps along his arms and neck. His teeth clenched as his body reacted before his mind could catch up. Hunger surged. A deep, ravenous pull that seized every cell in his body. The same craving he'd felt with the storm seed. The same aching need that whispered promises of relief and wholeness if he could just get a taste. Cade pressed himself tighter to the ground and forced the shell down over him. He couldn't afford to let the hunger take over with that leech nearby. The leech began to move its head again, sweeping side to side. Each slow arc ended with its mouth pointed toward the stalactite, lingering there as if tasting something Cade could not sense. The purple light brightened as energy built beneath the great tree, the air growing thick and charged. Cade timed his breath, counting in his head. When the pressure peaked, he exhaled. Lightning fell again. The second bolt struck the pond with the same explosive force as the first. Steam roared upward. The basin flooded and drained itself once more. Cade flinched at the flash but kept his eyes open this time, fixed on the stalactite. Just before the lightning struck, he saw it again. At the base of the stalactite, partially obscured by shadow and steam, was a recess in the wood of the tree. Too straight to be natural. Too deliberate. For a split second, he saw horizontal lines set into the cutout. Rungs. Wooden rungs. There was a ladder leading upwards. His breath caught. That couldn't be real. Trees didn't grow ladders into themselves. Magical great tree or not. The light faded and as the steam condensed back down he saw the leech was frozen in place. Its head locked in the direction of the tip of the stalactite. The massive body coiled inward, muscles bunching beneath slick crimson flesh. Cade's confusion spiked as the creature compressed itself like a spring. Then it launched. The leech shot upward with terrifying speed, its elongated body stretching impossibly fast as it surged toward the ceiling of the dome. Cade's eyes went wide as the creature's mouth clamped onto the tip of the stalactite with a thunderous snap. It hung there suspended by just its circular jaws. Its lower body writhed and twisted in the air, no longer touching the ground. The entire length of it dangled, swaying slightly above the pond. With the creature distracted, Cade fired off a quick identify. Corrupted mature swamp leech level? An apex predator twisted by unknown corruption. Its body has adapted beyond its limits, allowing it to absorb and metabolize volatile energies. What the hell? Cade whispered. Purple light surged again through the stalactite, brighter this time, racing downward toward the tip buried inside the leech's mouth. Cade braced himself for another strike. The crackle came but no lightning fell. Instead, the light vanished into the leech. Cade stared as the creature's body shuddered. Veins of violet flared beneath its translucent flesh, spreading outward from its mouth and down its length. The leech convulsed, not in pain but in something disturbingly close to satisfaction. A cold realization clicked into place. The leech wasn't being harmed. It was feeding. It was absorbing the lightning. Another pulse built in again, the leech drank it in. With each surge, its bloated body seemed to contract slightly, growing more compact, its color shifting from raw, blood red to a deep, bruised purple. Cade's stomach twisted. The hunger in his cells flared to life, that aching, gnawing need to consume. Watching the leech gorge itself on energy that should have been his ignited something ugly inside him. Something jealous and possessive. That was his lightning. How could something so foul, so mindless, devour what belonged to him? Rage boiled up from his gut. He wanted to rip it off the stalactite and tear it apart with his bare hands. He blinked hard and shook his head. No. Those thoughts weren't his. The leech was enormous and he was unarmed. Even if he did attack it, he doubted he could pierce its hide, let alone survive a direct fight. A new thought took root. One less suicidal. What if he didn't need to fight it? The lightning had to come from somewhere. System or not, trees didn't just fire bolts of lightning out of their ass. There had to be a source, and if Cade had to guess, it was up there in that cutout. The one he'd glimpsed near the base of the stalactite, just above the leech's head. The wooden rungs climbing into the hollow trunk were no coincidence. Cade's eyes flicked from the creature's swinging body to the shadowed opening in the bark above. His pulse quickened. He didn't need to feed here. Not if he could get to the source. The hunger deep inside agreed. Cade swallowed and tightened his grip on the shell one last time. He drew in a steadying breath, then another. All right, he muttered under his breath. Let's do this. He got up, planted his feet beneath him, and prepared to run. He was going to climb the leech. The moment he moved, the static in the air surged again. Purple light pulsed down the stalactite, racing straight into the leech's gaping mouth. The creature shuddered mid-swing, its body tightening as it drank deep. Cade felt the charge ripple through the space beneath the great tree and his skin prickled violently, every nerve lighting up as if in recognition. The leech was changing. Its already massive body tightened, flesh compacting with each pulse of absorbed lightning. Veins beneath its slick surface glowed faintly violet now, no longer just red and wet but tinged with something unnatural. It was feeding, growing stronger with every heartbeat. Cade didn't slow. He hit the base of the leech at a run and jumped, arms wrapping around its swinging body. The impact nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. The leech's flesh was warm and surprisingly yielding, compressing beneath his weight like overripe fruit. For a split second he thought he had it. Then the creature swung. Cade's grip slipped as the leech's body lurched sideways. He scrabbled for purchase with one hand while the other awkwardly clutched at the shell shield. The leech twisted again and Cade lost what little balance he had. He slid. Shit! He yelled as his fingers tore free and he dropped into the shallow pool of water below. The impact sent a wave splashing outward, soaking the ground beneath the great tree's canopy. Cade coughed, sputtering as he pushed himself upright, water dripping from his arms and face. His knees scraped against something hard just beneath the surface. He looked down. The bottom of the pool was not soft mud like he had expected. Instead, it was packed tight and unnaturally smooth. Pale, dense, and brittle looking in the places where the water had sloshed away. The earth beneath him felt sterile. As if all the life had been burned out of it, leaving behind only bleached and compacted ground. He did not linger. He scrambled out of the water, breath still heavy, and looked up at the hanging leech. He needed both hands if he was going to make it up there. Cade stared at the shell and realized that he needed to let it go. It lay heavy in his grip, ash-scarred and familiar. It had saved his life in the ashen wastes, his only piece of equipment that survived being dissolved by ash. It had been his shield against the storm and deflected countless leeches scrambling to suck him dry. Letting it go felt wrong. But the hunger inside of him roared again as purple light surged overhead. He was sure that if he didn't act now, the leech would drain the stalactite dry. "I'm sorry," Cade muttered as he set the shell down carefully at the edge of the pool. Then he turned back toward the leech without another moment of hesitation. Cade leapt and wrapped both arms around the leech's shrinking body, fingers sinking into pliant, rubbery flesh. It molded around his grip, deforming under the pressure of his hands. He gagged as warm slime smeared across his palms but forced himself to keep climbing. His feet kicked in, finding purchase as the leech's body compressed beneath him. Each step left shallow indentations that held just long enough to use as footholds. The creature writhed beneath him, its movements throwing him side to side, but Cade clung on with grim determination. Purple lightning pulsed again and this time, Cade felt it. The energy surged through the leech's body and brushed against his skin. His vision flashed violet for a split second as a thin trickle of power bled into him through his hands and feet. It wasn't much, barely a whiff, but enough to send his hunger into overdrive. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. He needed more, he needed the source of whatever was creating this lightning. He climbed faster. The higher he went, the worse it became. The leech's flesh was slicker near the top, muscles tightening and releasing in slow, powerful waves. Cade's arms burned, shoulders screaming as he hauled himself upward inch by inch. More lightning flowed, more violet light pulsing through the creature beneath him. Each pulse fed the leech and the trickle that followed teased Cade, driving his hunger further. By the time he reached the upper third of the leech's body, his muscles were trembling violently. He risked a glance upward and his breath caught. The cutout was real. Just to the side of where the stalactite met the tree, a circular opening lay in the wood. Thick, wooden rungs were set into the inner wall, forming a ladder that vanished upward. Deep inside, a warm amber glow flickered softly, brightening in time with the purple pulses overhead. Hope flared in Cade's chest but was immediately squashed when he realized the problem before him. The leech's body didn't reach the opening. There was a gap of several meters between the top of the creature and the lowest rung. Too far to step across and too far to climb. He'd have to jump and hope he had enough strength to reach and hold on. If his grip failed, he'd plummet at least 10 meters down to the ground. The hunger surged again, sharper this time. Part of him wanted to abandon the plan entirely. To climb higher, latch onto the stalactite like the leech had, and drink the violet lightning until nothing remained. But the memory of the last time he had been struck by violet lightning rose in his mind like a warning flare. That strike had stripped away everything he had gained from the earlier, gentler bolts, leaving him broken and emptied. No, he told himself firmly. Not again. He forced his gaze away from the stalactite and locked onto the ladder instead. Inside the tree. That was where he needed to be, that was where the source had to be located. Cade drew in a shaky breath, muscles screaming, and prepared himself. One chance. That was all he was going to get. He waited for the next pulse. The moment the purple light surged through the stalactite and down the leech's body, he moved. The lightning had just fired. He had a few seconds before the next one built up. He scrambled upward, climbing fast along the last stretch of slick, pulsing flesh. He didn't let himself think about how high up he was, or how much the leech was shifting beneath him. He just moved. Hand, foot. Hand, foot. Then there was nothing left to climb. The top of the leech curved away beneath him, its body anchored by the circular mouth still latched to the stalactite's base. The cutout to the ladder was off to the side and above, just out of reach. Cade inhaled once. Then he jumped. He pushed off with everything he had, launching himself off the leech's face. For a moment, he was weightless, airborne under the dome of the great tree. His hand stretched fingers grazing wood and caught. His fingers closed around one of the wooden rungs. Pain screamed through his shoulder as the momentum yanked him hard, but he held on. His feet scrambled against the air, searching for a foothold that wasn't there. He clutched the ladder with everything he had and hauled himself upward. A moment later, a thunderous splash echoed beneath him. Cade twisted his neck and caught a glimpse of the leech's massive form writhing in the shallow pool below, purple veins still glowing faintly beneath its skin. A shaky laugh escaped him. He'd made it. He was alive and the massive leech couldn't follow him up here. Cade lifted his gaze. The ladder vanished into the faintly glowing hollow above, where even the air seemed alive. Static crawled across his skin and buzzed through his veins. Every cell in his body ached for energy. The lightning had a source somewhere inside this tree. And whatever it was, he would find it. And he would consume it all.